asking for permission, getting permission, and then doing his thing in front of a woman.
Then it went to Aziz Ansari.
Aziz Ansari.
Just have it.
You're 6 minutes away from a live episode of Free Talk Live. Listen live at freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures showed that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa, as FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, but it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks, looking today at the corruption probe that has investigated Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, already facing intense criticism in the country over his complete failure even to recognise the threat posed by COVID-19. The probe's outcome threatens to put a crimp in the Brazilian leader's quest for re-election.
The last few weeks or last month or so, you've seen a real decline in his support. So now the vast majority of Brazilians are no longer supporting him, and a lot of the establishment business is looking for someone to back.
Shannon O'Neill is a senior fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.
He has, over the last year and a half, downplayed the severity of COVID. What he's in hot water for right now is there have been ongoing congressional investigations into the handling of COVID. We have seen just over the last week or so, someone from the health official in ministry come out with allegations that there was trying to illegally purchase particular vaccines, that there's corruption involved, and this is starting to reach throughout his administration.
In the kind of reaction that his accusers might well have anticipated, President Bolsonaro used scatological language to dismiss the investigation. He said he will answer nothing that emanates from the probe, saying the senators who headed it are simply determined to grind his government down. Presidential elections in Brazil will take place in early October of next year. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. And Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
It's being called the must-have tech gadget of the year. The Samsung Apex, which hits shelves today, streams video into your left eye, internet into your right eye, and sucks your dick all at the same time. Samsung spokesman Neil Werner is projecting the biggest sales in his company's history.
Are you kidding me? This thing does everything, plus it sucks your dick, all right? And I know what you're thinking. And yes, ladies, there is a version for you that eats you out. Hanging up Apple, we beat you the punch on this one. Samsung's got you by the balls.
In spite of the almost $1,000 price tag, customers are raving about the device.
For my career, I do need the internet and TV, and my dick sucked all the time.
I already have a TV and a girlfriend and a laptop, but to have all those in one device would be really nice.
Even a run of bad press about unsafe working conditions in the Apex factory in India have not dampened sales projections.
Yeah. Factory, switch up, blah, blah. How about you just plug your eyeball straight into the internet and get your dick sucked?
This is the Onion News Network.
Free Talk Live.
It is Free Talk Live, and as always, you can take control of the airwaves. You can bring up whatever you want to talk about here. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. And with you in the studio tonight, you've got Ian.
And Aria.
Lots of stuff in the news to talk about. International headlines of interest, including what's happening in Cuba, where thousands of Cubans are taking to the streets to demand, well, more freedom. Whereas in
Did you happen to see that the New York Times, I think it was, said something like, freedom is an anti-government cry?
Yes, that was what turned me on to this story, was what the New York Times said about it, and they're not wrong.
They're not, but it's shocking to hear them, openly admit that freedom and government are antonyms.
Yes, I don't think that was their intention. I think that
Freudian slip.
Yeah. I think so. But yeah, that's true. You can't have freedom wherever there is people calling themselves, or there are people calling themselves the state or the government.
Right. They exist to take freedoms away from people.
Correct.
That's what they do by default.
That's the definition of to govern or governance or whatever. It's to control. You put a governor on a car, it doesn't go above 55 miles an hour or whatever is the amount of time settled. So, or the amount of mileage speed settled. So if you want to comment here, you are welcome to do so. But that's what this is about, is what's happening in Cuba, where over the last couple of decades, things have been very interesting, at least from the outside. I imagine they're terrible when you're actually living there. But our co-host, Mark Edge, actually went down to visit Cuba. I think it was last year or maybe the year before that at this point.
Yeah, I'm a little sad. He has a friend who was supposed to call the show yesterday who never did.
From Cuba?
Yeah.
Like in Cuba?
As I understand it.
Oh, wow. That'd be great.
That would be fantastic.
Well, I would like to suggest to that person to use the SIP option, because then they won't have to pay long-distance charges to call the United States, because SIP is a free option. You can go to freetalklive.com and scroll down the page. You'll see some instructions on how to do that. Of course, we have our normal phone number for people that are in the U.S. and Canada. It won't cost you much, 603-283-6160. I think most people have free long distance these days, so it probably doesn't cost you a dime if you're within the U.S. But in Cuba, there's, of course, Fidel Castro. He's dead.
Yes, and his brother took charge, right? And started implementing some minor reforms, but nothing major.
Yeah, that's right. And it was... In Cuba, they have had virtually no freedom whatsoever to decide things like what you do for a living and whether you can own property and some of the basic stuff that we take for granted. And yes, I know we don't really own property in the United States because of property taxes, but
you do get to decide what you do for a living at the very least.
Yeah, and to some extent, you can still kind of decide what to do with your property depending on where you live, right? Like if there's no zoning regulations where you are, then you can kind of build whatever you want. They're still going to tax you on it, so it's not really your property, but you still get some decisions. And they didn't have very many decisions there in Cuba. So once Raul Castro took over for Fidel, as he was ailing on his way to the deathbed. Then they started to make some minor market-oriented changes, and there have been a couple of more of those tweaks over the years, some series of them. But it hasn't been enough, obviously, because, well, they don't have freedom there. They don't have any semblance of it. And according to the Miami Herald, and you always want to go to the Miami area to get good reporting on Cuba because there's a lot of, Cuban expatriates there, people who've escaped from the island, and they now live in Miami. In an unprecedented display of anger and frustration, thousands of people took to the streets Sunday in cities and towns across Cuba, including Havana, to call for the end of the decades-old dictatorship and demand food and vaccines as shortages of basic necessities have reached crisis proportions and COVID-19 cases have soared. From the Malecon, Havana's famous seawall near the old city, to small towns in Artemisa province and Palma Soriano, the second largest city in Santiago de Cuba province, videos live streamed on Facebook showed thousands of people walking and riding bikes and motorcycles along streets while chanting freedom and down with communism.
Oh, that's a positive development. Well, look what communism has done to them. They now have no food, and
right.
They're one of the few countries in the world that evidently want more vaccines.
But wasn't this the revolution? Wasn't this the people's revolution?
Well, that's how they painted it, right? But all of these revolutionaries, they always do this, and that's why I don't really trust libertarian politicians.
No, you shouldn't.
They always want to get in charge so that they can free you, so that they can create the paradise that you want. But then they get in power, and suddenly that old image that they were portraying is no longer relevant. I mean, we saw it with the Bolsheviks, and in Russia, we saw it with Nazi Germany. And
well, I don't think the Bolsheviks were pretending to be libertarians or anything like that. But
no, but
when people get into power, their tune changes. That much is true.
Yes, and that's what I was getting at, not making any sort of comparisons to libertarians becoming Nazis or anything like that. But
we have seen actual libertarians or people who purported to be maybe even voluntarists or quote-unquote anarchists getting elected here in New Hampshire and then completely turning against libertarianism.
Yes,
so
wasn't there a person who helped found the Free State Project who did exactly that? There was a woman. I don't recall her name.
Well, there was a woman named Amanda Bolden who she wasn't a founder of the Free State Project, but she was an early mover. She was a founder of Shire Sharing, which was a charity that I think might still exist, but she's not involved with it anymore. But they did Thanksgiving dinners for poor people. They would give them all of the ingredients, a turkey and whatever other things that you would have in a Thanksgiving dinner. They would give a basket of that stuff all to hundreds of purportedly needy families. Turns out many of them were actually on welfare and doing very well for themselves. But nonetheless, that wasn't her fault or whatever. It's just they got the names from somewhere and they went out and they gave people some free food.
Still a good deed.
Yeah, and we had her on the show to talk about that and how she was an anarchist, and this was like an voluntarist charity that she had created and so on and so forth. And then when she became a elected Democrat, she ran as a Democrat to get elected in her little area of Manchester where she lived.
I've considered that because it would be more successful than running as a Republican, right?
In a place like Keene, you might have more success. So it just depends. You got to know your territory. And in her case, she I don't know what her personal story is as to why she did this. Some suggest it's because she started to date a Democrat and then ultimately marry a Democrat, and that she had become an anarchist because of her boyfriend at the time when she was an anarchist, and that she then became a hardcore Democrat when she was then getting married to a Democrat.
One of those people who just reflects whatever they're surrounded by.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, it was really sad, too.
Is this the same person who now hates libertarians and decries them all as pedophiles or whatever?
Something like that, yeah. She's turned completely against the very people who, helped get her elected and helped, her charity become a tremendous success and bought her and her daughter's ice cream at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. They sold ice cream, homemade ice cream for years. And she just turned against all those people, which is really sad.
That is sad because those people were her friends, right?
They purportedly were.
Yeah. And it's always sad to see people turn on their friends.
But the friends at that point didn't have any political benefit to her. And now she'd become a political animal. And so she needs to curry favor with the Democrats because she has to work with them, and now she wants to be, friendly with them. So she's completely turned. And so I just gave that as an example of, and it doesn't, I don't feel good about that. I think it's terrible. I liked Amanda Bolden, and, I never did anything to her personally. I always had her on the show. We always talked about the cool stuff that she was doing, and I was a supporter. And I think that, even as a Democrat rep, she's still probably one of the better Democrats. She did help. She did, I think, sponsor some of the legislation that, for instance, helped legalize the what's that stuff that you give to the dopers when they're the
Narcan?
Narcan. Yeah, she was one on the forefront of the Narcan bill. She also helped, I think, with a bill that either eliminated or lessened penalties. I think it eliminated penalties for anyone that reports somebody who's got an overdose. So she's still doing good work on the war on drugs, but she didn't have to turn against her previous friends. I think that was the worst part of it.
Definitely. And I mean, there are some libertarians who get into office and who still, carry on libertarian principles. We know a lot of them.
Yes.
Who are now in the State House of Representatives, or
there's 20 plus of them there.
Yeah. It's powerful to see. But I still don't trust them.
I'm with you on that. And I think that, how many of them have been corrupted to the point of Amanda Bolden? Hopefully not near as many, but I don't spend a whole lot of time with those folks, so I can't really say, oh, well, he or she has changed in this way. But regardless, I'd rather have them there than somebody else. 603-283-6160. You can join us here. This is Free Talk Live. More on Cuba.
Brute force, intransigent defiance, adamantine will. These are the hallmarks of the AI tank. These gigantic machines have the firepower of an army, but they also have their own sense of honor and duty. When the world breakers arrive, battle will be joined, planets will shake, and war and peace will never be the same again. World Breakers. Stories from David Weber, Larry Correia, and more. Available August 3rd from BaneBooks.com.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at Bitcoin.com. That's Bitcoin.com.
Do you feel like your nation, state, or community no longer holds your values? Have you dreamt of a place where people agree that liberty is important and are free to pursue their projects so long as they respect the property of others? There are many people just like you that are discovering freeprivatecities.com. Their social media links are at the upper right of the page at freeprivatecities.com. All skill levels will be needed when the first of the Free Private Cities opens. It's sooner than you think. Stop arguing and build. freeprivatecities.com.
If you want to know the latest about Free Talk Live before we go on the air, all you need to decide is how you want it delivered. It's your choice. Visit news.freetalklive.com to receive our usually weekly news updates by email. Plus, we have a Twitter account at twitter.freetalklive.com, and you can follow us on the decentralized Mastodon platform at toot.freetalklive.com. So please follow us at toot.freetalklive.com and sign up for our emails at news.freetalklive.com. On Free Talk Live, we're bringing people to the ideas of liberty every day. From wrestling superstars like Glenn Jacobs.
You guys really are having an impact, I believe. Like I said, a lot of where I am now is due to listening to Free Talk Live. You changed my mind on some very important issues years ago.
To random people tuning in on the radio.
I was kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. I heard your show by chance on a Saturday night. From there, I went on, joined the Free State Project, and become an amplifier. So, I mean, that's really the reason why I amp is because I know that if it wasn't for you guys being on as many stations as you are, I never would have found the ideas of liberty.
Your amp will directly change more lives by getting Free Talk Live in front of people looking for talk radio online and on the air. When you amp Free Talk Live, you get perks like access to the AMP-only Facebook group and AMP podcast. Visit amp.freetalklive.com. The LRN.FM social media channels have been revamped. We've eliminated Facebook and focused on other platforms like Twitter and Mastodon, the decentralized alternative to Twitter. On our accounts, you'll find posts from multiple LRN.FM show hosts together in one place. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.lrn.fm, or better yet, move to the decentralized Mastodon social media platform at toot.lrn.fm, toot.lrn.fm. I think you'll like it.
I'm crazy about My Magic Mud. This is the most important oral care product created this millennium, and I'm not kidding. We all have different opinions on politics and issues, but we all have mouths. And I want yours to be as clean as possible, with teeth as bright as they were meant to be. I will never be without My Magic Mud. It's a little surprising, but man, does it work. If you only listen to one thing I say ever, go to mymagicmud.com and get 20% off with code FTL. mymagicmud.com, code FTL.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com.
It is Free Talk Live. The number is 603-283-6160. If you want to join us here, we're talking about thousands of people in the streets of Cuba protesting against communism, they say. And we'll tell you more about what's going on there. Plus, the people aren't just in the streets in Cuba. Also, South Africa has riots happening. These aren't just peaceful protests in South Africa. They are, actually breaking into businesses and hauling away loot, and people are getting killed. So it's pretty ugly there.
Oh, so it's basically what happened in January 6th in the Capitol, right?
We're gonna get into that. Plus, of course, your calls and thoughts as well. 603-283-6160. With you tonight, it's Ian.
And Aria.
And also, Bitcoin.com is a great place to go to learn about cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. You want to get started learning the basics, go click Get Started at the top of the page at Bitcoin.com. You can watch a video or more than one if you got time, but I'd recommend at least the first one. It's like 3 minutes long, and then you'll have the basics down about what is cryptocurrency, what makes it special, what makes it different from this old money system that we've all been used to for generations here. Why should you care about it? Go to Bitcoin.com and click Get Started to learn more. Also, if you're not new to cryptocurrency, you can go to news.bitcoin.com, get the latest news headlines there as well. As we continue here, the thousands in the streets, not just in Havana, but in cities and towns across Cuba, according to the Miami Herald, chanting freedom and down with communism and Patria y Vida, which means homeland and life, which has become a battle cry among activists after a viral music video turned the revolutionary slogan "Homeland or Death" on its head. "We are not afraid," chanted Samantha Regalado while she recorded hundreds of people walking along a narrow street in Palma Soriano. And the photos are, these are huge crowds of people.
Well, there's no reason to be afraid, right? They're already starving.
Right,
so
you've
the
got
government,
nothing to lose.
Yes, the government has nothing to hold on except a faster death, maybe.
This is why we see protests in places like Cuba where people are not, well-fed, and they're not happy from all the bread and circuses that they've surrounded themselves with, all the entertainment options, of course, that we have because we're well-fed and we have leisure time because, we're a productive economy and relatively free in comparison. Now, we can talk all night about the ways we're not free in the United States, but it pales in comparison to the lack of freedom that the people have in Cuba.
Yeah, the U.S. government definitely has a leash on us economically. It's just a longer leash than what they're allowed in Cuba.
During the day, protests erupted in several cities, including the island's biggest, but also in smaller towns. According to the Herald, they say images circulating on social media of angry crowds overturning police cars are unseen in a country where the communist government has kept a tight grip on the population for more than 6 decades. But one of the things that has changed in Cuba over the last 2 decades is the internet has sort of arrived, and especially so over the last that's why you have somebody with a Facebook streaming live going in the streets of Cuba. I remember when, what was his name? The guy from Photography is Not a Crime, Carlos. the founder of Photography is Not a Crime, he went down there like 5 years ago, and the internet was spotty at the 4-star hotel he was at. Like, it wasn't even reliable at one of the better hotels.
And I imagine
Havana.
it was fairly restricted as well. He probably couldn't just, go online and check on Facebook.
That's a good question. I don't recall the details about that, but obviously it's gotten better over time, because that is one of the areas where the government has loosened up over the last 2 decades. And so, to the benefit of the people, right? Because technology is a double-edged sword. It does, while it allows for government gangs to snoop on us and do, information gathering of other evil sorts. Right. It also allows us to share information in an instantaneous manner that previously, you had to do very slow methods like picking up a phone and calling people. Now you can just shoot out a, cell 411 alert or whatever. Last time the Cubans took to the streets to protest against the communist government was in 1994, and Fidel Castro was still alive. But the uprising, known then as the Maleconazo, only took place in Havana and didn't last long, as the former Cuban leader quickly turned the demonstrations into a massive exodus after he opened Cuba's maritime borders. Thousands of Cubans left the island in makeshift boats and rickety rafts in what became known as the Balsero Crisis. And, of course, they went to Miami.
So he basically said, I'm not changing anything, but you can leave?
As I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah. And those that were able to make it to Miami without being caught by the Coast Guard would have been, to some extent, granted asylum, I think.
And that's horrific that the U.S. Coast Guard would have caught these people and sent them back to Cuba in the first place.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's what happened back then, but if I'm wrong about that, correct me at 603-283-6160.
Oh, it sounds like the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yeah. Video streamed on Facebook by Antonio Miguel Jobas Halowaski around 1 p.m. in Palma Soriano showed hundreds of protesters calling for freedom and shouting, "Down with the dictatorship" and "Down with Diaz-Canel," a reference to Cuban leader Miguel Diaz-Canel. I believe this is the new El Presidente that's taken over for Raul Castro, because he's also, he was old when Fidel was dying, so he had to step away at some point.
Well, the Cuban government kind of screwed themselves here, didn't they? By freeing up parts of the economy and allowing people to see, oh, hey, look, the government's not being involved, and now our internet is so much better.
Right.
Now they know, hey, if we get the government out of all of these other things, they will also be better.
Wow, the government actually let me decide what crops to plant, and now I've got a motivation to, actually tend to my land. That's pretty cool. So the crowd is seen pushing a police car. Oh, and apparently the protesters also demanded medicine and COVID vaccines and the end of hunger. So here's the thing, how many of these people are actually libertarian? Probably not that many. In fact,
probably not.
I did hear there was apparently a Twitter post from somebody on the island saying that they are raiding the homes of the Libertarian Party members in Cuba, or at least some of the. I don't know how many.
I fell out of touch with those guys like 4 or 5 years ago, but no, they were doing great activism, and with the threat of the Cuban government hanging over their heads the entire time.
Yeah, that's a scary place to be for sure. So kudos to them for stepping up like that. The crowd is seen pushing a police car and shouting, quote, "The dictator's just arrived," in reference to the police. Later, one protester is heard saying, "This is a peaceful demonstration." Well, it was until the cops showed up. Facebook user Carlos Alberto Ceballos Brito pushed a video around the same time, or published a video showing a crowd gathering in Alcazar near Havana and protesting against the government, chanting "Down with Diaz-Canel" and "Patria y Vida." In several moments, the crowd used strong language to refer to Diaz-Canel, whose popularity is sharply falling as life on the island deteriorates. In an impromptu televised address in the afternoon, the man blamed the protests on U.S. efforts to tighten the embargo with the alleged intention to provoke social uprising that would justify a military intervention. Now, the last I'd heard, and mind you, I don't pay the closest of attention to what's going on in Cuba, but last I heard was Barack Obama, in some of the few good things that he did, was he actually reduced the embargoes against Cuba, allowed for traveling to Cuba, and I believe allowing for some business to transact in Cuba and with Cuba.
I believe that's true. So, I don't think the U.S. government has any desire. I mean, they're evil, sure, but I don't think they have any desire to invade Cuba.
Trump, I think, was talking about re-engaging some of that, so maybe he did and we didn't catch wind of it. So I'm curious to know what's developed in the last 4 years. But regardless, it's typical for communist dictators to blame the United States on all the bad things happening in the communist country. So continue the discussion. Your thoughts are welcome.
Karl Wattner, longtime proponent of a voluntary society, died last December. You may have seen his articles published on his website, voluntarist.com, in his newsletter, The Voluntarist, the Mises Institute, or elsewhere over the last 40 years. His newest book, I Must Speak Out, Volume 2, The Best of the Voluntarist, is now available via Liberty Under Attack Publications. This 430-page second volume spans the years of 2000 through 2020 and includes articles by Karl Wattner, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Karl Hess, Benjamin Tucker, George H. Smith, Lysander Spooner, Pete Eyre, Joyce Brand, and many others. I Must Speak Out is for the newly initiated, the veteran voluntarist, or anywhere in between. Buy the book now at libertyunderattack.com/voluntarist. For more great content on building a voluntary society and for Karl's extensive archives, check out voluntarist.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries, and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures showed that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa, as FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, but it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live. Talking Cuba. If you have been there and you want to comment, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe you are there and you want to comment, feel free to join the show. The number is 603-283-6160. 603-283-6160. As the story over at the Miami Herald is pointing out, the last time there were protests like this in Cuba, they were much smaller, only in Havana, and didn't last nearly as long. There are thousands of people in the streets in not just Havana, but small towns, all the other cities in Cuba. This is a major push against the so-called leader there in Cuba, a man named Díaz-Canel, and we will tell you more about that. Also want to say thank you to Pizza Cake Man, who is a Free Talk Live Silver Amplifier. Pizza Cake Man contributing to the AMP program for $5 a month. He's helping us get on more radio stations around the United States, bring new internet listeners on board. If you like the ideas of freedom being transmitted 7 nights a week on broadcast radio and you want to help us with that mission, please join the AMP program, get some cool perks and some benefits like Pizza Cake Man has done. Head over to amp.freetalklive.com. That's amp.freetalklive.com. You can sign up with PayPal, credit card, debit card right there at amp.freetalklive.com. So we're back to the story here from the Miami Herald. Detailed piece. They do pretty good reporting on Cuba there. Díaz-Canel, the man who is quote-unquote in charge of Cuba, that a lot of these crowds are blaming, the crowds demanding freedom, demanding an end to communism, down with the dictatorship, some of the things that are being chanted in the streets there.
Well, that's sort of the problem with the dictatorship, right? If anything goes wrong, it's the dictator's responsibility. It's his problem. He caused it because he's the dictator.
Well, in his case, and in the case of Maduro down in Venezuela, and in the case of Kim Jong-un over in North Korea, these are, of course, 3 of the most communistic countries on the planet right now. All of them blame the United States for their problems. What's that? The power went out in North Korea? Because it goes out all the time, apparently, according to, people that have been there. The power's out? Well, blame the United States. They're constantly attacking us, and we have to defend ourselves from the United States. You've got a problem.
That's just how propaganda works. I mean, we've seen it over and over in fascist regimes and socialist regimes. Is that they need someone to blame an enemy.
Right, because they can't actually admit any wrongdoing themselves. They can't admit that, okay, yeah, this experiment with socialism, it didn't work, and we're sorry, we're going to try something else. In the case of Venezuela...
Wouldn't it be amazing if they did, though?
Well, in the case of Venezuela, they kind of did, but not really. Here's what they did there. In Venezuela, of course, things were going to S for the last several years with tremendous hyperinflation. The
People
Bolivar,
were having to purify sewage water because they had nothing else to drink. It was...
Medicines aren't available. And so what happened was people were using the dollar, which, we're critics of the dollar, obviously, because it's a government money and it's centrally planned and it's inflated, but it's not as inflated as the hyperinflating Bolivar. So
give them time, though.
No doubt, but at least for the last several years, people in Venezuela, they're seeing the dollar as a stable coin by comparison, and they're, grabbing as many as they can, and they were pricing products in both Bolivar and dollars without really having permission to do so by the central government there. And what Maduro ended up doing was basically saying, without saying, we're not going to arrest you for this anymore, and sort of allowing the dollarization of Venezuela for some amount of time. And I think now it's sort of become officially like a thing there, that it's
I don't remember
okay.
the most recent update, but I think that's correct.
Yeah, like it's okay to do this now, is to price things in dollars. You're not going to get arrested for it anymore like you would have in the past. So they've sort of acknowledged that their money sucks, and they're letting a less sucky state money in sort of unofficially.
Their money sucks so bad that their money printer won't even accept their money as payment for the printing services.
Correct. Yeah, you still can't actually, as I understand it, last I heard, you can't take the dollar into your bank. So
I think it was that you can, but it's highly regulated now. You'd have
to exchange it. What I mean is you can't put it in your bank account. There's no way that you can actually bank the dollar. You can use it, but you can't bank it. So it's not fully anointed by the government there like it is in, say, El Salvador, where the dollar is actually legal tender. And now Bitcoin is as well, which is our topic from last week.
Yeah, but it requires the Lightning Network, and it's a mess.
So
it's a really bad implementation there.
Yeah, it is. Back to Cuba, though. So they always blame the United States. And to be fair, the U.S. does deserve some blame for doing things like putting an embargo on Cuba. There's no doubt that does have an effect, but it's not the effect that they blame the United States on. It's not the economy destruction. sort of effect. It's just,
Right,
it
and
hurts them because they can't have free trade with us.
And that's one of the reasons the internet is so important there in Cuba, is that now these people know that the United States government did not impose any new embargoes that caused this. It was just their government being incompetent.
Visibly upset and raising his voice, the Cuban leader, Diaz-Canel, warned that protesters would face a strong response and called, quote, all revolutionaries, unquote, to confront them on the streets, quote, with firmness and courage. So
I think the revolutionaries are out there in the streets demanding freedom, dude.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
was it the Cuban Revolution in like the 50s or something?
Yeah, but it's still going on, according to the government.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Right. The revolution never ends. See, it's always for the people.
That way they don't have to actually... Why bother?
Why bother saying it's continuing?
Yeah.
Maybe somebody out there believes it. You know, there's probably some 80-year-old Cuban, you know, who's basically managed
sitting there going, changes and, you know, class struggles are going away. It's any
Something
day
like
now.
that. It's right around the corner. Quote, we are not going to hand over the sovereignty or the independence of the people, he said.
But the people are in the streets.
Right. They're
demanding independence.
See, here's the fun. Right. And so, yeah, there's thousands of people in the streets. If there were revolutionaries left, then wouldn't they already be out there and doing their revolutionary duty? Why would they have to be called to the revolutionary duty of opposing these peasants who want their freedom back? Shouldn't the revolutionaries, you know, already be toting whatever guns and clubs they've been issued by the government to go out there and oppose these crowds? Shouldn't they have already put down this uprising?
The problem, though, is that the revolutionaries probably already starved to death.
Or they're like 90 years old because... You know, that's probably how old Fidel Castro would be if he were still alive today. So he says, there are many revolutionaries in this country who are willing to give our lives. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Give our lives.
Well, that's part of their whole collective propaganda, right? Their whole collectivism nonsense.
Yeah, he didn't say give their lives, even though that's whose lives would be given. He himself is not going to give his life, at least not on purpose.
He has flunkies to do that for him.
He'll be protected by the so-called revolutionaries, his goons. He says, we are willing to do anything, and we will be in the streets fighting. Cuba, says MiamiHerald.com, is in the throes of its worst economic contraction over 3 decades, as chronic inefficiencies and paralyzing bureaucracy have gradually eroded the country's production capacity, including the essential food and agriculture sectors. Trump-era sanctions, okay, so maybe there were some changes under Trump, have reduced access to vital economic lifelines like remittances, and foreign investment has plunged. Painful currency reforms this year have sent inflation soaring, and long lines for food have again become commonplace. So let's be clear, currency reforms, that's not the United States' fault. Okay, so no doubt sanctions are bad. And if Trump cut off remittances to Cuba, shame on him for that. That is not a cool thing to do, because that basically means family members in the United States or friends or whoever wants to send money to a Cuban person would be somehow restricted from doing that. I'm going to look into that.
Unless they use cryptocurrency.
Exactly, and we can talk about how cryptocurrency completely solves that problem. But I am curious to know exactly what they did. Did they prohibit all remittances from the United States? Did they tax remittances? You know, what did they do to make it more difficult officially to send money through the old money channels? I'll look into that coming up here. You can share your thoughts as well on what's going on in Cuba, and of course you're welcome to bring up anything that's on your mind as well. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. And how can cryptocurrency help this situation? How is it already helping the folks of Cuba? Because they have internet now down there to some extent. I presume that there's some awareness already of the benefits of crypto amongst the population. We'll continue. It's Free Talk Live. The Free State Project has reached its goal of 20,000 liberty lovers who've pledged to move to New Hampshire and get active to achieve liberty in our lifetime. Perhaps you're trying to figure out what part of New Hampshire should be your destination. If so, consider Keene. You'll find more than 150 reasons to move to Keene at move.freekeene.com. Keene is famous for its historic, publicity-generating activism, as well as being the liberty media capital of the world. It's home to freekeene.com, New Hampshire's destination for liberty activism, news, and opinion. For years, we've been compiling over 150 reasons to move to Keene at move.freekeene.com, where you'll learn about some of what's happening here and what makes Keene a great place to live. If you love liberty, you'll probably enjoy anywhere you end up in the Shire. But do your due diligence first. Please visit move.freekeene.com for the full list of over 150 reasons to move to Keene. That's move.freekeene.com.
There are basically two types of advertising: direct response and branding. Radio's great for direct response with its low cost to listener ratio, but audio can't be beat for branding, which is a longer term endeavor. You want to be the first thing that someone thinks of when they think about your product or service. If you have a local business that you want kept top of mind in your community, call the station. If you need national reach, Free Talk Live's got around 200 radio stations, millions of monthly listening sessions, can suit all budgets, and if we don't think we're right for you, we'll tell you. Email me, mark@freetalklive.com.
There are lots of ways to listen to Free Talk Live. Our podcast has been around since podcasts began, and now the FTL feed is loaded with content besides our full show archives. Did you know that we make it easy for you to customize your podcast subscriptions? We have different feeds, one that includes only our full shows, one with just the Daily Digest, and our main feed that includes everything. You decide what you listen to. It's quick and easy to customize your feeds at feeds.freetalklive.com. That's feeds.freetalklive.com.
This is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends. I've run websites since 1996 and have used over a dozen web hosts in that time. AgristHosting.com is the only one that hasn't broken my heart. Agrist Hosting's uptime and service is stellar, and their DDoS mitigation is the best I've seen. That's important because if you tell the truth in this world, you'll ruffle feathers. And some people will try dirty tricks to silence your voice. No matter what the haters hit us with, Agrist Hosting keeps our websites online. If you have a mission-critical commercial presence or a world-changing activism site, you cannot tolerate any skullduggery. So go with agristhosting.com. Have a WordPress or blog site, but you're not satisfied with performance or uptime? Or just want raw hosting? Want to pay with Bitcoin? Agrist Hosting specializes in high-performance hosting with personalized service. Go to agristhosting.com and click on the button that says Get Hosted. That's agristhosting.com.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live Listen line, 641-793-0191.
Looking for a great real estate investment? Consider New Hampshire, which is ground zero for the Liberty Movement. Your first call should be to Mark Worden from Porcupine Real Estate. He's more than just a real estate agent. He's your New Hampshire concierge. Where are the best places to live? Do you want farm, city, the burbs, or forest? Do you want a duplex or multifamily building so that renters pay your mortgage? There are homes in all price ranges in New Hampshire, and Mark can help with financing too. Invest in liberty and property. Mark Worden can help.
PorcupineRealEstate.com.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com.
All right, it is Free Talk Live, and you can bring up what you want here. The number is 603-283-6160. We're focusing on Cuba, the protesters in the streets, what has happened over the last several years to various different U.S. government rules and such in regards to Cuba. According to the Miami Herald story, there has been a change during the Trump administration. So after Barack Obama did something good, it was toward the end of his administration, he did a couple good things. He let some people out of prison, and he relaxed the restrictions on U.S. people like visiting and doing business with Cubans.
Didn't close Guantanamo Bay, though.
No, sadly, not. There wasn't a whole lot of good that you could say about Obama, but he did a couple good things, and this was one of them. But unfortunately, during the Trump administration, what happened with the remittances, according to, this is Reuters. This is an article from October 28th of 2020. Trump's administration enacted a rule, so it wasn't passed by Congress. So in theory, Biden should be able to undo this.
In theory,
but he hasn't.
Biden is senile.
Yeah. President Trump's administration last week said it was enacting a rule prohibiting persons subject to U.S. jurisdiction from sending remittances to communist-run Cuba via firms that work with Cuban military-controlled companies. What does that mean? The translation, apparently, is there's a military-owned company in Cuba called Fincimex, because remember, in communist countries, the government's into everything, right? So there's not a private company really in Cuba, or at least there wasn't for a long time. In the case of financial services, they're less likely to be handed over to private companies right away, even in some sort of decentralization that might be going on. But in this case, the military owns Fincimex, which is the main Cuban partner of Western Union, which millions of Cubans have used for 2 decades in the United States to send money back to their loved ones on the Caribbean island. Now, Western Union said at the time they were looking into other options as far as, what could they do besides working with this military company to get money to people in Cuba. From what I can find so far, they have not figured anything out. So as of mid-November.
Because Cuba's a socialist regime.
Yes.
So there's only one of these companies,
Correct.
and it's owned by the government.
Yeah.
It's not going to have a competitor that Western Union can use.
Right. So as of mid-November of last year, Western Union has closed its ability to send remittances to people in Cuba. And that hurts because it means that the Cuban people who are impoverished by their own government cannot get pumped in money from outside, which is how they had survived for this long. The same way that North Korea survives based on donated food, for instance, and other donated items from other people in other countries around the world. So these communist countries are such failures.
It really shows a weakness, doesn't it? That the people of these communist countries cannot exist. They cannot survive without money pumping into them.
Yeah.
They're not self-sustaining.
No, absolutely. But it's unfortunate because these restrictions do allow the government people to blame the United States. And to some extent it's true, but again, it's not that the US sanctions would kill a productive country. If you were a productive country which had enough freedom to let people make their own decisions about what they do, to make their own decisions about what they want to own, about what they want to, their vocation is, to be able to, move money around, do business internationally with whatever countries would do business with them. If they had those freedoms, losing the United States wouldn't be the end of the world.
No, it probably wouldn't even affect them.
It'd be meaningless because there's, another 180 plus or 190 whatever countries out there with which you would be able to trade. So let's go to Mike. He's on the line in Dover, New Hampshire, listening to WTSN. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, you made me think of Seth Rich. It's his anniversary, talking about the government blaming other governments.
Who?
Seth Rich.
Who's that?
He died 5 years ago. He was DNC employee.
Oh, this was the guy who died in the car explosion in D.C.?
Was he the guy involved with Hillary's emails?
Yeah, it was not a car explosion. He was shot in the back.
Okay.
They said he was robbed. He was, and it goes to NSA. They blamed Russia for hacking the DNC server. Former NSA employees said, if you go by the metadata in the timestamps, there's no way that was hacked by an outside source because outside hacking takes time. And this happened very quickly, like a thumb drive. Remove that information.
Wasn't the issue that Podesta clicked one of these links to reset his password or something like that?
Yeah, that was tied to it.
And his password turned out to be the word password? So I mean it's not.
Oh my God!
Your average amateur hacker could have done that in the span of minutes, but timestamps on computers can also be changed easily.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wonder. We never hear about these IP addresses. We never get to see exactly where these hacks are made from.
Well, anyone not utilizing a VPN while they're hacking is going to end up in prison.
Yeah, but my point is, Show me the proof that Russia hacks these companies. Show me the actual physical evidence.
Yeah, they don't have it. I mean, because ultimately what they could show you, if they were going to show something, it'd be like, oh, look, here's an IP address from Russia that has hacked our server. Well, anybody can, they can fake that easily. Somebody could be on a VPN and hacking your server through a Russian VPN.
This NSA. I don't trust our intelligence agencies.
No, of course not.
They could very well be hacking our own companies here.
Yeah, why wouldn't they?
Right, exactly.
Well, there's very good reason to believe they are. If you listen to Kaspersky Labs.
That's a security firm, right?
Yes, they do IT security, and they have identified this group that they call the Equation Group that is almost certainly the NSA. Now, they can't point the finger and say, yeah, this is the NSA, but it's very clearly a state-backed agency in alliance with the United States government. It's either the Israeli government or the United States government, and chances are it's the NSA.
Then I wondered if you fellas saw the pictures going around Twitter between Fidel Castro and Justin Trudeau.
Oh, the theory that Trudeau, which is the Canadian Prime Minister, is the son of Fidel, like the secret son of Fidel Castro.
Right.
I've heard this theory before, and it's interesting. I don't know if there's any truth to it, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
If you look at the pictures compared, the different expressions in different times, when they were young, when they were old, when they, and the different expressions on their face, it's uncanny how similar.
Interesting. Mike, thanks for the call tonight. I appreciate hearing from you. The number here is 603-283-6160. Mike had said when he had called in he was interested in the Bitcoin aspect of this, so I do want to expand on that a little bit. So again, the U.S. government telling Western Union and any other remittance companies that they're not allowed to do business with any military-connected contractors down in Cuba, which basically eliminates remittances from the island from the United States, meaning that families can no longer send money into their family members on the island.
So, Rich, there's a question. Well, how can you send these people money in a way that is safe and secure where you don't have to use one of these illegal remittance businesses?
Correct, because the businesses they're just not going to do it for you.
Right, they're not going to break the law for you to help your Cuban family.
Correct. The answer, of course, as you suggested, Aria, is cryptocurrency.
Yes.
And
you don't have to have Western Union's permission in order to make a cryptocurrency transaction.
Yep, and Western Union will not get a cut of your transaction. It's basically, if you don't use Bitcoin, if you use something like Bitcoin Cash or Dash or one of these other cryptocurrencies, there's basically near to zero fee. Or Monero, yeah, that's a great one. There's near to zero fee when you send any one of those methods. So, people that are sending remittances are used to sending 5, 10, 15, maybe even more. I don't know what it costs because it's probably more to send it to a foreign country. Like if you're sending a remittance within the United States, can you call it a remittance if it doesn't cross international boundaries? If you're sending a money transfer within the United States over one of these methods, it's a few bucks. And I suspect it's more than a few dollars if you're just sending it to someplace like Cuba, where there's a bunch of bureaucracy that gets in the way.
I don't know the numbers, but it's obviously going to be more expensive. Yeah.
It's going to be a lot more expensive than sending your average cryptocurrency transaction. Now, the challenge is going to be receiving the cryptocurrency and then doing something with it in Cuba. Like, how easy is it to take it to a friend and have them exchange or trade your crypto for whatever Cuban peso is, which, by the way, there were, as mentioned in the Miami Herald story, monetary reforms that happened recently in Cuba.
Which caused inflation, which is all the more reason that the Cuban people should be getting into cryptocurrency.
Yeah, exactly. So ideally, you should just take the crypto and not turn it into whatever Cuban pesos because they are seriously, inflating the currency. It's sounding like, at least down there.
I'm sure that somewhere in Cuba, if you had some cryptocurrency, you could use it to buy bread on the black market.
Yeah, and that is another question: is what's the black market like right now? What's the black market rate of the Cuban peso? Things are changing there, and I want to get into the monetary reforms coming up. It's Free Talk Live.
When Monster Hunter International discovers one of Isaac Newton's wardstones being auctioned off, they decide to steal it and use it to destroy the Chaos God once and for all. But a mysterious thief upends their plan, and it soon becomes a race against time as something much older and infinitely more evil awakens in the jungles of South America. Monster Hunter Bloodlines by New York Times bestselling author Larry Correia and Baen Books. Visit monsterhunternation.com for more.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless free market non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at bitcoin.com. That's bitcoin.com.
So you've signed the Shire Society Declaration and are planning your move to New Hampshire to be around more liberty-oriented people. Next, sign up for the Shire Society Forum at forum.shiresociety.com. There are a bunch of people there who are already in the Shire, and they want to meet you. If you're already in the Shire physically, you should also come by the forums. Remember, not everyone uses Facebook. New people are signing up for the Shire Society Forum every month, so drop in and say hello at forum.shiresociety.com. Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 2 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation, and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures showed that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa, as FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, But it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks, looking today at the corruption probe that has investigated Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, already facing intense criticism in the country over his complete failure even to recognise the threat posed by COVID-19. The probe's outcome threatens to put a crimp in the Brazilian leader's quest for re-election.
The last few weeks or last month or so, you've seen a real decline in his support. So now the vast majority of Brazilians are no longer supporting him, and a lot of the establishment business is looking for someone to back.
Shannon O'Neill is a senior fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.
He has, over the last year and a half, downplayed the severity of COVID. What he's in hot water for right now is there have been ongoing congressional investigations into the handling of COVID. We have seen just over the last week or so, someone from the health official and ministry come out with allegations that there was trying to illegally purchase particular vaccines, that there's corruption involved, and this is starting to reach throughout his administration.
In the kind of reaction that his accusers might well have anticipated, President Bolsonaro used scatological language to dismiss the investigation. He said he will answer nothing that emanates from the probe, saying the senators who headed it are simply determined to grind his government down. Presidential elections in Brazil will take place in early October of next year. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. And Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
Our planet is but a giant petri dish swirling with pathogens, all mixed by the filthy stirring straw that is the world's fauna. Simply by sitting on her eggs and breathing, this duck unleashes a torrent of avian botulism, cholera, and duck plague into the air. These jousting elk slough off bits of skin and fur, sending millions of harmful bacteria into the air. Our closest relative, the chimpanzee, is itself the fountainhead of AIDS. Bitter at the ascendancy of man, these scheming apes brood this deadly virus in their jungle lairs. Nowhere on Earth is safe from the threat of animals. Even in the bitter wasteland of the Antarctic, penguins walk for miles inland, ensuring their afflictions reach every corner of the globe.
This is the Onion News Network. Free Talk Live.
This is Free Talk Live. Number here, 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. Kicking off the second hour of the program. With you tonight, it's Ian.
And Aria.
Of course, you can bring up anything you want, especially if you're on the streets in Cuba. Anywhere in Cuba where thousands of people are across the entire country, not just Havana, but in towns large and small, protesting the status quo there, protesting communism specifically.
Demanding freedom.
Demanding freedom, demanding an end to communism, an end to dictatorship. They've got serious money problems, which I want to get into because it's always fascinating to, like a train wreck is fascinating in a horrifying manner to see what these communist governments are doing to money all around the planet. And remember, the same stuff can happen here and is happening here to some extent as far as inflation is concerned, but it's even worse in these other places. And I want to get into what's happening in Cuba. But first, in case you thought Joe Biden actually cares about the little guy, in case you thought that Joe Biden was actually different from Donald Trump and was going to, maybe step in and undo some of the damaging policies that Trump put in place to actually hurt the people of Cuba. Because remember, when you cut off remittances to Cuba, you're not hurting the Cuban military. They are funded by the government there, and they're going to be fine.
The military will always get fed in a communist dictatorship. Always.
Correct.
Because they're the ones who, shoot the peasants for the dictator.
Yep. And, if it comes to the point where the military's not eating, well, then that's the end for the communist dictatorship. But up until that point, they're going to take care of the military. So the military is not going to be harmed by a policy against remittances. So just for those tuning in, we discovered in the last hour that one of the issues on the island in Cuba, beyond the starvation that communism tends to cause and all the issues that communism and central control cause, was exacerbated a bit by the Trump administration in November of last year, making an administrative change. So it was just an executive order that Trump apparently signed to say, okay, we are now going to ban all U.S. companies from doing business with any company in Cuba that has a connection to the military.
And that's every company in Cuba.
It's certainly true of Western Union. They had a connection to FinCemex or something like that, which is a military-owned financial corporation that handles remittances on the island. So basically, all of Cuba has been cut off from receiving remittances, which are monies sent from usually family members here in the U.S. to help their family eat in Cuba.
Well, a person should certainly be allowed to send money to whoever they want, but I don't...
In a free country, they should.
I don't think I agree that Trump's policy exacerbated the situation. It just sort of removed the Band-Aid that was, or the tourniquet that was slowing the bleeding.
Okay, I see what you're saying there, but it is a restriction.
It was wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong. It's a restriction on our freedom at the very least, and it certainly is hurting the people of Cuba. And if you thought Biden actually gave a damn, well... Here's the news from May of this year, reported by TheHill.com. The Biden administration's first major move on Cuba is the strongest signal yet that it has little appetite to reverse Trump-era policies toward the island nation. Yes, the State Department this past week listed Cuba as among those, quote, not cooperating fully with United States anti-terrorism efforts, unquote. Renewing a determination made first...
Well, that's because they're watching the U.S. government go out there create more terrorists. And they're like, no, we're not going to assist with this.
Maybe that's it, or they just, don't want to help the U.S. when they're embargoing their country. But for those
Also
in
fair.
favor of normalizing U.S. ties with Cuba, the move was seen as a purely political decision, but one that suggests the Biden administration may continue with the hardline approach taken by former President Trump. And then it just, goes on about how nothing's going to change, according to the Biden administration State Department. So, no, he's not going to... All you would have to do is wave his little magic signing pen and undo one of the Trump... Because when he got into office, he undid a bunch of Trump executive orders. That's one of the things... Oh, yeah, he got right in there.
I don't pay attention to what these people do.
I generally don't, but I was paying attention to the inauguration or whatever because there was all those troops that were, remember, the National Guard.
Oh, yeah.
So I was paying attention to that one. And, he got into office and undid a bunch of Trump executive orders, but I guess the starving people of Cuba just don't matter to Joe Biden, in case you thought he was going to do something about it. All right, so let's get into the money aspect of this, because, again, people are
Maybe
in the
if
streets.
he could smell them, he would care.
Well, he's old. He probably can't smell real well.
Is that why he gets so close to kids in order to sniff
Yeah,
them?
probably. Al Jazeera.com. Now, they are one of the better news reporting agencies on the planet. What will Cuba's new single currency mean for the island? Who knew that Cuba had two currencies? Did you know that?
I did not. What was the second one?
We'll talk about it because it's very confusing.
I would expect it to be.
Yeah. So, and this was published in January of this year. So at the very end of 2020, the Cuban government formally ended its dual currency system.
And 7 months later, people are in the streets starving.
Yes, they are. Devaluing its peso for the first time since the 1959 revolution that swept the late Fidel Castro to power.
So that can't be accurate. There's no way a government went 50 years without devaluing their currency. I just cannot believe it.
It's the official devaluation.
Okay.
So this is it's different than what the black market would say about the value of the peso, or what even the open market, might say about it. But the government has set the exchange rate at 24 Cuban pesos to $1. And the convertible Cuban peso, known as the CUC, will be phased out completely by June, leaving the island with one currency for the first time in more than 20 years.
So am I correctly inferring that the CUC was used to transfer the pesos into dollars?
We'll get into it. The Cuban peso, known as the CUP, was created as the island's currency by the first president of the country's post-revolution central bank, Ernesto Che Guevara. You know, the guy that like murdered a bunch of gay people and others.
I never knew he actually became president, though.
He must not have lasted very long. Wasn't he assassinated or something like that? What happened to that guy?
I don't know.
I don't care.
I just know he was homophobic and racist, and he killed a lot of people.
Garbage.
Yeah.
But thanks to an embargo by the United States and some of the island's state-run economic policies, the value of Cuba's currency evolved to become a tricky issue. When a country's domestic currency is unstable, subject to high rates of inflation, or generally not trusted to hold its value, people might start to use a second currency they think will fare better, like the Venezuelans are with a dollar, for instance, especially when it comes to buying imported goods. Why is that? Well, it's because the importers won't take your crappy hyperinflation currency. It doesn't do them any good. By the time they can get rid of it, it's worth a third of what it was worth before they was handed to them.
Yeah, and no one wants to use money or accept money that is going to do that. They want to get rid of it as soon as possible.
So if people use another unofficial or currency unofficially, it can create a thriving black market and exert extreme pressure on the national economy. Sometimes countries officially turn to the US dollar in what's known as dollarization, or they might turn to the euro. So, for instance, El Salvador officially has dollarized their country. They've said the dollar is legal tender here. Whereas unofficially in Venezuela, the dollar is basically legal tender without them officially saying so. So Al Jazeera, here's like one of the sort of sub-headlines. Okay, so does that mean they only use a foreign currency instead of their own? They say countries can opt to fully adopt the US dollar or another foreign currency as their own, but though it may provide stability, it gives governments far less control over their monetary policy. Of course, they can't have that.
Right, they have to be able to control whatever their currency they're allowing their people to use, because otherwise they can't pay, their soldiers and their police officers.
Countries can also choose to use both a domestic currency and a foreign one at the same time, and that's what Cuba elected to do after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Havana legalized the use of the US dollar alongside the Cuban peso in 1993. So is Cuba also using the US dollar now? Sometimes. Earlier this year, Cuba re-allowed dollar stores, which let people buy goods like food, toiletries, and electronics with bank cards loaded with US dollars or other foreign currency. That, in turn, let the government snap up those dollars to help deal with its liquidity crisis, according to Reuters. The use of dollars had previously been banned in 2004 when the government created its second currency, the CUC. The CUC has historically been used for state business and buying goods internationally, but it cannot be taken out of the country. It's pegged 1-to-1 to the dollar. So let's talk more about this weird situation in moments. This is Free Talk Live. You can share your thoughts with us.
Do you feel like your nation, state, or community no longer holds your values? Have you dreamt of a place where people agree that liberty is important and are free to pursue their projects so long as they respect the property of others? There are many people just like you that are discovering freeprivatecities.com. Their social media links are at the upper right of the page at freeprivatecities.com. All skill levels will be needed when the first of the Free Private Cities opens. It's sooner than you think. Stop arguing and build. freeprivatecities.com.
Some of you asked, and now we've delivered. LRN.FM's live Keene, New Hampshire studio shows are now streamed in HD on Twitch. Visit our channel at twitch.lrn.fm and give it a follow. If you have Amazon Prime, you get one free subscription on Twitch. If you use it on our channel, Twitch will give LRN.FM a monthly piece of your Prime subscription cost. So please watch, follow, share, and subscribe to twitch.lrn.fm. That's twitch.lrn.fm.
After a devastating war, the alien visitors were driven back, and their willing human collaborators were left behind to face the music. When Emma Jean Anderson's ex-lover springs her from prison, Nathan Foster and his 14-year-old nephew Ben are tasked with bringing the pair to justice. An easy enough job until they discover something is inside Emma Jean, and the fate of the planet hangs in the balance. The Family Business by Mike Coopery from BaneBooks.com.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at Bitcoin.com. That's Bitcoin.com.
We have some good news. The indictments against Ross Ulbricht in the District of Maryland were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can never be refiled. This is especially good because those indictments contain the only charge ever made that Ross engaged in murder for hire. This was a serious allegation that Ross Ulbricht denies. It was never prosecuted or ruled on by a jury, but was trumpeted by the federal government and the media as if it were proven fact. The Maryland court held these indictments for almost 5 years, poisoning Ross's case and leaving him under a cloud of unproven allegations. As explained in Ross's appeal to the Supreme Court, the fact that the judge used these allegations to give Ross a draconian sentence of double life without parole violated his Sixth Amendment right to a jury trial. Judges are required to issue sentences based on convictions decided by a jury, not unproven allegations never even charged at trial. Although this is a positive development, the dropped indictment will not set Ross free. Now, a presidential pardon is Ross's only hope of freedom. Sign the petition at freeross.org. freeross.org.
If you want to know the latest about Free Talk Live before we go on the air, all you need to decide is how you want it delivered. It's your choice. Visit news.freetalklive.com to receive our usually weekly news updates by email. Plus, we have a Twitter account at twitter.freetalklive.com, and you can follow us on the decentralized Mastodon platform at toot.freetalklive.com. So please follow us at toot.freetalklive.com and sign up for our emails at news.freetalklive.com. The new 4th edition of Healing Our World, The Compassion of Libertarianism, will take your understanding of liberty to a deeper level and has over 1,300 updated references, new cartoons, and a foreword by Dr. Ron Paul. With discounts for multiple book purchases, the 4th edition of Healing Our World is a great gift for the liberals, pragmatists, environmentalists, and Christians in your life who think libertarianism is cold-hearted. Get yours today at healing.freetalklive.com and use promo code FTL for a $5 discount.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com.
It's Free Talk Live. We're talking about government money.
And the limitless creativity they have in working around or attempting to stave off the demise caused by whatever problems they created.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Venezuela, they have revalued their currency and knocked, I think it was like 3 zeros the first time and then 5 zeros the second time off of their crazily inflated bolivar. Now,
you mentioned during the break that the exchange rate is like 3.3 million bolivars
to $1 US. In the black market, the official exchange rate is completely different.
Well, the black market rate is the actual
the true rate.
So
yeah. And so that, of course, I'm wondering what's the black market rate of the Cuban peso now? And we're going to get to that because I did find a news story that makes a claim to what the black market rate is within the last month or so. So we'll share that with you on the way. But we've been discussing sort of what has happened recently. We've got thousands of people in the streets in Cuba today, and I don't know when they started, but recently there's been some massive protests down there across the country. They want an end to dictatorship, an end to communism. Things are possibly going to change there in Cuba if they, manage to take this guy who's supposedly in charge of the government there out of office and burn it all down or something like that. I don't know where it's going to end, but it's interesting, of course, to watch these situations. And
well, I hope it ends with freedom.
I do too, but of course, usually these things don't. Usually it just ends with somebody being dethroned and some other power seeker filling the vacuum.
Probably a military general.
Sometimes. Maybe the power seeker will be better than the previous power seeker, but it's hard to say in advance how that's going to shake out.
Well, we saw how the last revolution shook out. So, yeah. Well, is shaking out, apparently. Because it's still ongoing, they claim.
But were those people, I wasn't around for that, and neither were you, but were those people overtly communist? I think they were.
I'm sure they were.
Yeah, so these people, at the very least, if they're commies, are hiding it because they're talking about freedom. They're talking about an end to communism, an end to dictatorship. So at least from the slogans that are being chanted, it sounds good. What does that mean as far as whatever politicians are going to rise to the top of this protester heap? We'll tell you about that. But
well, they may have been admitted communists, but I doubt that Che and Castro and the others were out there. Yes, we're going to impose a communist dictatorship. Well, they probably presented it in better terms than that.
Right. It would have been called the People's Revolution, and the people are now in charge of Cuba, even though it's really only these people, the people who are in the government.
The select few, the oligarchy.
So let's talk more about the Cuban money situation, because ultimately, as you were saying earlier, Arya, if people are happy, if people are fat, if people are well-fed, if they're entertained, they got things to do to keep them busy, they're not going to revolt. And in Cuba, they're not well-fed, and that's one of the reasons is because the money system there sucks. And that's because, well, governments that are as centralized and centrally controlled as the Cuban government tend to hyperinflate their currency and do all kinds of manipulations to the money supply there. And so we're kind of going into an Al Jazeera story about the recent history, the last few decades of the Cuban peso, which in 2004 was added to by a second state currency called the CUC. And so there's the CUP, which is the Cuban peso, and then there's the CUC, and I forget what that is, the convertible Cuban peso. And the CUC is pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar. And that's because they had been allowing people in the 1990s to use the US dollar in, for instance, international purchases. If you're running a store, you need to get a pallet full of toilet paper into the country, you've got to pay with $1 or with €1 or something else. You've got to give them something of value because they don't want the peso.
Something that the supplier actually wants.
Something they could use. They could flip in their bank account or whatever. So the dollar was sort of tolerated there for some amount of time, and then in 2004, dollars were banned and replaced with the CUC. Because again, the CUC is pegged to the dollar 1-to-1, and then exchanged with the public at a rate of 24 pesos to buy, and then they would get 25 pesos if they sell. At least that's what it says here. I'm not sure if I've got that right. Anyway,
so the Cuban government was trying to extract the U.S. dollars from the Cuban people,
yes,
more or less.
They were. The CUP is still used for everyday domestic transactions, and many Cubans are paid their wages in the CUP. Then they have a photograph here of a man at a store in Havana with a sign on the wall that says "No CUC." No.
Interesting.
Here's the next question. Confusing. Are they worth the same thing? No. For the average Cuban, the CUC is worth 25 times more than one CUP, and not everyone can get their hands on them. Remember, this was back in January. As of June, the CUC has gone away. We'll talk about that too. CUCs are used in business that involve foreign money, such as tourism or buying goods imported from abroad. But most Cubans who don't work in the tourism sector are still paid in CUPs, and this dual system has created a lot of disparities, which is one reason why CUCs are being scrapped. So what happens to all those convertible pesos floating around? Cubans will have through June, so last month, to trade in their CUCs for Cuban pesos, according to a decree published by the Cuban government's official gazette in December.
And they won't get, of course, the black market rate. They'll get the government rate.
They'll get whatever rate the government decides. And in this case, the devaluation is 24 Cuban pesos to one CUC. It means they will lose a significant amount of money in doing so, something that is likely to hit private sector workers who have been paid in CUCs for years particularly hard. It's already been a tough year for those workers, many of whom are employed in the country's tourism sector, which has been decimated by coronavirus-related travel restrictions and Trump administration's harsh policies toward the island. So what's the Cuban government doing? Well, Cuba announced it would increase government workers' salaries and pensions to adjust for inflation. But private sector workers won't have those protections and will be able to afford less when paying with their new Cuban pesos than with their convertible ones. In announcing the currency...
Cuba has a private sector?
Well, as we said, there were some reforms introduced in the last couple of decades. In announcing the currency, I don't think it's a very large one, but I'm not sure. That's a good question. What
At any
percentage?
rate, there is a private sector, but government employees are getting raises while private sector, to adjust for the fact that the government destroyed their money, but private sector employees are not.
Correct.
Sounds about right. The government always takes care of its own first.
In announcing the unification plan, the Cuban government said it would publish the exchange rate for the Cuban peso daily on the central bank's website, meaning that it could potentially fluctuate rather than stay at its fixed rate. That's also new for the island. In a speech earlier this month, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, the guy that's being protested right now, said the reforms were necessary, quote, to go ahead with the transitions or transformations that we need to update our economic and social model. What will that mean for Cubans? Well, it's a painful transition. They may see the price of everyday goods go up at a time when they're already dealing with shortages. One of the country's main supporters in the region, Venezuela, has similarly seen its economy further pummeled this year by skyrocketing inflation and U.S. sanctions.
My favorite part of this is how this article is from, I think you said January, and it asks, what does this mean? How is this going to affect them? And then 7 months later, they're rioting in the streets because they're starving to death.
Yep, and that means the tourists who typically... the government announced it will also require incoming travelers to present a negative COVID-19 test, so tourists will now have to have vaccinations, and so there won't be as many tourists coming there, presumably. Until then, Cubans are left to do what they have successfully done for decades, adapt to tough economic conditions and innovate where they can. That according to Al Jazeera. But what does it look like now? 6 months later, what is the money situation? They're getting rid of two currencies, going to just the peso, forcing people to trade them in. What's the Cuban peso worth on the black market now? We'll tell you coming up.
On March 16th this year, government task forces violently raided the New Hampshire Bitcoin Embassy, the Mighty Moose Mart, the homes of Aria DiMezzo, Andy and Renee Spinella, Colleen Fordham, a grandmother, and perhaps most relevant, the studios of Free Talk Live. The Crypto Six were arrested. 4 were released on bail conditions, but Ian Freeman was held hostage for 69 days. Rich Paul, also known as Nobody, remains captive. We've consulted attorneys who say no crime even appears to have been committed, but that didn't stop the Joint Thug Task Force from ripping out wires from our broadcast stacks, taking Free Talk Live off the air, resulting in a violation of our and your First Amendment rights. You can visit thecrypto6.com to help, but as importantly, contact other media and tell them about this outrage. This case is likely to set precedent for cryptocurrency use well into your future. Help our fight for liberty and financial freedom at thecrypto6.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation, and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures show that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa. As FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, but it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com, and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live.
This is Free Talk Live, and you can join us here. The number is 603-283-6160. With you tonight, it's Ian.
And Aria.
Bring up anything you want, though. We are talking about international news tonight with the Cuban people hitting the streets in large numbers. Thousands of people filling city streets, town streets as well. People all across the country. This is the largest protest in decades in Cuba.
I suspect it's probably higher than, thousands as well. It's probably tens of thousands.
Probably being misreported by the media for sure. But at the very least, we are able to see photographs. We are able to see video coming out of Cuba thanks to the fact that there actually is internet to some extent in Cuba now. So that's helping the people in the situation there. The government, of course, of Cuba has caused the situation there. And one of the situations that they've been, privy to, is the Cuban money situation, which they created by having two currencies in a confusing manner for, I don't know, the last 15 or so years.
Well, they did what governments always do. They confused the situation as much as possible so that people didn't realize they were being robbed. But
yes,
ultimately, that's what this was. They wanted to phase out the USD, or the use of the US dollar in their country. So they created this other currency, and then they got rid of that too and forced people, if they wanted to have any sort of money whatsoever, to convert what they had into the peso.
At a 24-to-1 exchange rate, meaning if you take the CUC, the convertible peso, which is a 1 to $1, yeah, and then you exchange that for the CUP, which is the original peso, if you will. That is, they will then give you 24 original pesos for one CUC, and you had to do it by the end of last month, so it's over now.
And I can't imagine that the actual exchange rate of the peso to the USD is 1 to 24.
That was my question as well. I said to myself, all right, well, we know what's happened in Venezuela, where there's the official exchange rate, and then there's the real exchange rate in the black market. And the neat thing in Venezuela is there's a website called dolartoday.com, DOLAR today.com, that tracks the black market rate of what you can get on the black market for $1 US, and right now it's 3.3 million roughly Venezuelan bolivar.
Insane.
And when they revalued the bolivar back in, I think it was 2018 now at this point, August of 2018, it was 72 to 1 at that time. Just to give you an idea.
Just keep knocking off those zeros and then tacking them right back on.
Yeah, that's how it's been going. So
this time it will be different though.
Here's a somewhat recent story. This from June 11th by Latin American News, Rio Times Online. Cuba. Now, it's being reported in a Brazilian newspaper, but it's about Cuba. They announced Thursday the temporary suspension of bank deposits of dollars in cash as of June 21st, a measure it attributed to the U.S. financial and commercial embargo, and which comes in the midst of an economic crisis on the island with a strong devaluation of the local currency. The country's state-owned banks will only accept U.S. dollar deposits in cash until June 20th, informed the Central Bank of Cuba, the BCC, in a television program exclusively dedicated to announcing the new measure. This comes at a time when the value of the dollar on the black market has grown unchecked to over 70 Cuban pesos this week. Now, this was in the beginning of June. So this story is a month old at this point. I have not found a more recent number as far as what the dollar is worth in the peso, but I suspect you can probably get more than 70 pesos for a dollar by now.
Well, yeah, what we're looking at here is the Cuban government found a way to basically steal 2/3 of the wealth from the Cuban people, between 50% and 2/3. If the actual exchange rate is something like 70 pesos for a dollar and the Cuban government's giving them 24.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
It's just robbing from them.
Yeah, so you could, until the end of June, you could go in with a dollar, US dollar, or a CUC into the bank and get 24 pesos out of it. Or you could go to the black market and you could get 70.
Right, because that's the actual exchange rate. But if you didn't want the government to steal from you, then you could sell it to someone else.
Yes, and that's with the people that still have the dollar. If you have the CUC, you better have gotten rid of that through the official channels, because no one in the black market's going to take that from you, because it's worthless now.
That's true, but
right?
It was pegged to USD,
It
so
was,
presumably
by the government.
They could have gotten, the actual fair amount of USD from it.
The banks wouldn't give it to you like that. You can only go one direction in these exchanges, right? You couldn't, if you had CUCs, which were the government pegged money to the dollar.
You couldn't swap it out for USD?
No way. Why would they let you do that?
I have faith that these people aren't evil, immoral monsters.
Stop it. You do not.
I know. I forgot temporarily that these people are evil, immoral monsters.
Yeah.
So obviously they wouldn't allow that.
Yeah,
But
it was the same way in Venezuela. You could take the dollars into the banks. They'll take your dollars from you.
Oh, of course they will. Yeah.
But you could not go into the banks with Bolivar and get dollars out. It don't work that way. Even if the bank has the dollars, they're not allowed to give them to you.
So what was the point of the CUC then, except to... There was no point other than robbing the Cuban people.
Well, that might have been their plan, but the ostensible point, as I understand it, was dollar bad, we give you this thing which is equal to $1.
And it's basically $1,
Yep.
except other countries don't take it.
Right.
Because they don't want it, because it's not $1.
Correct. And so they got rid of it 15 years later. So now it's gone. The CUC is gone. They're back to one official state currency in Cuba, and people are in the streets, and they are protesting. And right now, the value of the dollar is worth 70 Cuban pesos, at least as of a month ago. If anybody knows of a website that we can go to that actually tracks the regular daily updates of what the Cuban peso is worth, I would like to know what it is, because when I look for black market Cuba peso, search for that, all I find is news articles. So there's not like a useful website. Anyway, that's what's going on there with the money. The governing entity, according to Rio Times, of Cuba's banking system denounced that it is increasingly difficult for the island to find international banking or financial institutions willing to receive, convert, process, or process cash in U.S. currency as a result of the extraterritorial efforts of the United States, or effects of the United States embargo. He announced that U.S. sanctions have tightened over the past 4 years during Trump's administration and currently remain in place. As we spoke earlier, Biden is not going to do anything about Trump's restrictions, according to the State Department.
And we mentioned earlier that, cryptocurrency can be used as a way of bypassing these restrictions from people who, need to do that. The Cuban government could similarly use cryptocurrency to bypass these sanctions.
Yes, they could, but they must realize that cryptocurrency would also empower their people in a way that would be untouchable by the government.
Yeah.
Because...
Plus, I don't think anyone is going to sell them, Bitcoin Cash for pesos or whatever.
Yeah, nobody wants those things.
I mean, why would they?
It's crazy. You can't do anything with them.
And contrary to other types of currency, this is why governments create their own currencies. The government has to actually do something to warrant paying them in cryptocurrency if they want to acquire some.
They are so desperate to hold on to your dollars that they have closed, according to the AP, in May of this year in Cuba, tourists can no longer exchange out pesos to the dollar. So you can't, even when you're leaving the country, you can't stop off at an airport exchange and get dollars back. You have to keep the peso.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, so it's a one-way operation. So if you didn't spend them all while you were there, take them home, because you can't get dollars for them.
It would be easier if you could just use U.S. dollars there, but obviously they don't want that.
You can. It's just not probably legal for you to do that. Whether or not the shopkeeper, I guarantee you pull out $1, and as long as you don't look like an undercover cop, there's a good chance that shopkeeper is going to take it from you. Because on the streets, they can flip that into whatever they need to, flip it into.
Something that's, actually going to buy them food.
Yeah, or hold on to it. Because while, again, the dollar is being inflated, it's not being inflated like the Cuban peso. And it's now that they've untethered their government money from the dollar, so to speak, you're likely going to see hyperinflation kick in like it did in Venezuela. That's
always the next step, yeah.
Yeah, if they don't burn this government out of its offices in the next week, did the protesters in the streets right now, if the protesters in the streets don't successfully overturn this government somehow, you're going to see hyperinflation, I think. But you're welcome to weigh in. 603-283-6160. This is Free Talk Live.
The Shire Free Church offers a sanctuary to those seeking an escape from state churches.
The Shire Free Church is an interfaith, diverse group of people that may not share identical theological beliefs. As a member in or minister of the Shire Free Church, you are a sovereign individual and may be the faith of your choice.
We don't claim to have all of the answers.
We are open to all peaceful people.
We want to learn from each other.
What unifies the Shire Free Church and its diverse members is peace,
love, and liberty. There are many paths to God, one for every individual.
The Shire Free Church does not define a specific path beyond those parameters that must be your foundation.
Peace as your way,
love as your guide,
and liberty as your light.
Learn more at church.shiresociety.com.
That's church.shiresociety.com. Are you a cryptocurrency advocate? The Crypto Tip is the ideal outreach tool to help new people discover cryptocurrency. It's a printable business card-sized tip that you can give to service providers, preferably in addition to a good cash tip. When the server scans the QR code, it'll bring up an explanation of cryptocurrency, how to install a wallet, and allow them to claim the tip. If they don't claim the crypto, you get your tip refunded to you after a time period you specify. Plus, if they do claim the tip, you get an email alert. Create as many tips as you want at cryptotip.org. That's cryptotip.org. The LRN.FM social media channels have been revamped. We've eliminated Facebook and focused on other platforms like Twitter and Mastodon, the decentralized alternative to Twitter. On our accounts, you'll find posts from multiple LRN.FM show hosts together in one place. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.lrn.fm, or better yet, move to the decentralized Mastodon social media platform at toot.lrn.fm, toot.lrn.fm. I think you'll like it. Why did you move to the Shire?
I moved here to the Shire because there's other people around who take liberty just as seriously as I do.
I moved to the Shire because I saw videos of people challenging authority and thought that I could get support myself. It called to me, like, do this, right now.
I wanted to be around people like me who got it, and once I got here, I knew there was nowhere else that I wanted to be.
I've always wanted to change the world, so I moved to the Shire to join people who were actually working towards doing the same thing.
The people here are awesome, loving, and positive. It was for the adventure and for the feeling of something important is happening here, and I just wanted to come to sort of be part of that.
Visit shiresociety.com to read and sign the Shire Society Declaration and learn the reasons why, if you love liberty, you should immigrate to the Shire. Plus, connect with others via the forum at shiresociety.com. That's shiresociety.com. There are lots of ways to listen to Free Talk Live. Our podcast has been around since podcasts began, and now the FTL feed is loaded with content besides our full show archives. Did you know that we make it easy for you to customize your podcast subscriptions? We have different feeds, one that includes only our full shows, one with just the Daily Digest, and our main feed that includes everything. You decide what you listen to. It's quick and easy to customize your feeds at feeds.freetalklive.com. That's feeds.freetalklive.com.
Breaking weather news. Belize is sunny and around 82 degrees every day this week.
What's the forecast for your life? If current politics and economic prospects are cramping your freedom, escape to the tropics. ECI Development has affordable second homes for you to own or rent in Belize and other tropical countries. Places with stable governments and growing economies. Secure your freedom now. To find out more, send an email to ftl@ecidevelopment.com.
Got Telegram? You can follow our channel there and discuss show prep with other listeners at telegram.freetalklive.com.
This is Free Talk Live. The number, if you want to join us here, 603-283-6160. Have you been to Cuba recently? Are you there right now? And do you want to tell us about what it's like there in the streets with thousands of people protesting and demanding an end to communism, an end to dictatorship? They are tired of not having control over their own lives, and they want to have a shot at that. So,
not having food as well.
Food is difficult to come across when the government controls all industries, or a good chunk of them. I don't remember what part of the country is privatized at this point. They did have some semi-market reforms implemented over the last 2 decades, but it's obviously just a drop in the bucket in a place like that. So,
I mean, just imagine having these systems set up where the government controls who plants what, where they plant it, what year they plant it in, and how they're supposed to manage it. It's obviously not going to work.
Well, a lot of people don't have to imagine it. They tried it in, Soviet Russia, for instance, and you had bread lines as a result of that. You had people,
you had plenty of people starving to death because
that's correct.
of it.
You had people starving to death. You had tractors breaking down that couldn't be repaired because the government, or the government has to decide who gets the tractor parts and how many tractor parts to order and
how many tractor parts to manufacture that year.
Presuming they had money to order them in the first place. They probably weren't even manufacturing them because, they're just it's not like they were making their own tractors, right? They're buying them from somewhere else and importing them because the government sucks at doing everything. So, you got that situation now in Cuba with people not being able to make decisions for themselves, and that's why people aren't being able to be fed. That's why people in a tropical island, which does not have the problem of winter, so they have year-round growing. If they were to, produce things, they could do it. Same thing's true with Venezuela. They're very, very, when times were good, when things weren't as socialist in Venezuela, they were pretty great. Like, Venezuela was one of the more wealthy countries in South America.
Well, yeah, they have plenty of oil.
And
the world wants oil.
And a temperate climate in which you can grow anything you want to grow. So, that has been completely
Plus, Cuba's
squandered.
an island, and there's plenty of fish in the ocean.
Yeah, it's been completely squandered in Venezuela, and same is true in Cuba. In Cuba, they're sick of it. They're hitting the streets, and, they don't have... Russia's not going to back them like they did back in the 1950s, I suspect.
I'm not sure that Russia can.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean,
the Soviet Union was powerful and wealthy-ish. But is Russia?
Russia still does trading with, Cuba and Venezuela. They're still one of their kind of supporters, if you will.
Propping them up.
Yeah. They'll buy the oil from Venezuela. They'll sell it to Cuba or whatever, right? If you want to comment, you can. The number is 603-283-6160. So things are bad there right now, and people are sick and tired, and we're going to keep an eye on this situation and see how it develops over time, as looks like Joe Biden's not going to lift a finger to make the situation any better for those people down there. And because of the Trump embargoes...
I know he's an evil politician, but hopefully he can see the human suffering that Trump's policies have caused and lift them.
No, he hasn't yet, and he's been in office for, 7 months now at this point? 6, at least half a year. So anyway, that's that story. You can comment 603-283-6160. I had another international story of interest, and this one is out of South America, where there's tremendous rioting going on down there. And
South America or Africa?
Sorry, did I say South America? South Africa. Thank you very much. Yeah, South Africa, where people are looting, people are destroying, people are dying, people are rioting, and this is all over what happened to the former South African president. Now, can you think of another president that had a so-called riot happen regarding his presidency?
I would say Trump, but only because you said so-called riot.
Yeah, because the news media has been talking about this January 6th
insurrection.
thing. Yeah, they call it an insurrection. They call it a riot. They call it dangerous. Like there's actually been, I think it was Glenn Greenwald put a Twitter out or a tweet out about these leftist journalists who are talking about how damaged they are from having to go through the insurrection in Washington, D.C., and how scary it was.
Well, these are the same people who were traumatized when they shot an AR-15.
Yeah. So these,
which actually happened, by the way.
The traumatization of a snowflake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Simply by shooting at a target an AR-15. He says he developed PTSD from it. Now,
my anxiety.
You got to juxtapose that against all of the little kids out there who are shooting AR-15s and guns like that and who are totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah, these people with the millennials with their anxiety and their worrying and constantly go down to Johannesburg, okay? You want to see what a riot looks like? South Africa has deployed soldiers Monday to quell violence that erupted following the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma after days of riots left at least 6 people dead. Police said disturbances had intensified as Zuma challenged his 15-month prison term in the country's top court. The judgment in the case has been reserved. Smoke swirled from burning buildings. Did that happen in D.C.?
No. I don't even think they burned a flag, sadly.
As items from burgled shops. Did that happen in D.C.?
It happened in Seattle.
It happened in Minneapolis, but we're
Maybe
talking
that's
about
what I was
D.C.
thinking.
We're talking about D.C. here. There's no doubt Minneapolis was a riot.
Sure.
I'm not saying that the U.S. hasn't had riots, but regarding a president, specifically we're talking about the media and its overreaction to January 6th, which was basically an unauthorized tour of the U.S. Capitol.
It was a no-knock raid on the government.
Right, and the government gang, of course, is acting like this is the biggest attack on the United States government, and now they've I think allocated another $2 billion to the U.S. Capitol Police. I don't know if you heard about this, but the Capitol Police are now going to be opening offices in states. So there's now going to be offices of the U.S. Capitol Police in California and Florida. And they say that they need
just those 2 states.
I'm sure they're going to expand from there, but that's where they're starting. The biggies, they're starting in the biggies. And they're saying they need to be there to ensure the safety of the representatives and the senators. So even though there's already the Federal Protective Service and the Department of Homeland Security,
there are
the
also
FBI,
police in California and Florida that could take care of that.
Well, and there's specifically federal police. Federal Protective Service is that's one of the branches of the federal cops. You go up to the courthouse in Concord, you're going to see them.
Really?
And they've come out they arrested Russell Canning in Keene, New Hampshire 15 years ago for his protest at the IRS office because they're the Federal Protective Service. So they knew there was going to be a protest at the IRS office. So they went there and they arrested somebody.
For protesting?
Yeah, federal cops. So
how did that work out for them?
I don't think Russell paid the fine. So it didn't work out in that way, but
that's good.
My point being, there's already federal cops all over the place, and now there's going to be more, thanks to the so-called insurrection. That's the excuse they're using. Anyway, back to South Africa. So burning buildings, burgled shops, items lay strewn on the side of the road in Pietermaritzburg in Zuma's home province of KwaZulu-Natal, KZN. The sporadic pro-Zuma protests that broke out when he handed himself over last week have escalated into looting and arson, mainly in KZN, but also in Gauteng, where the country's biggest city, Johannesburg, is located. Some COVID vaccination sites were shuttered due to safety concerns. Quote, what we are witnessing now are opportunistic acts of criminality with groups of people instigating chaos merely as a cover for looting and theft, according to the new South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, in a late evening address on Monday. 489 suspects had already been arrested, and all government agencies had been mobilized. How many people have they arrested for the January 6th incident in the United States?
I have no idea.
I think I heard they've gone after like 10 of them. I could be wrong about that. I heard also they confiscated a Lego set recently as evidence in one of these cases. So like, what happened in the United States?
Hold on. I need to know. How was a Lego set involved in the January 6th incident?
It was a Lego set of the Washington, D.C. monuments.
So they used it for like
ostensibly planning is what the FBI.
I imagine that there are much better, simpler ways to hold. Okay, I'm just picturing adults now sitting around building Legos in a room so that they can plan what the media has called an insurrection with Legos.
Right. So you got hundreds of people like looting and destroying things in Johannesburg in South Africa, and people playing with Legos in the United States. That's your contrast. The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. I also saw a video of like just people shooting at each other. I don't know if they were cops shooting at the other protesters or who. It wasn't really clear. There's more coming up here.
Do you feel like your nation, state, or community no longer holds your values? Have you dreamt of a place where people agree that liberty is important and are free to pursue their projects so long as they respect the property of others? There are many people just like you that are discovering freeprivatecities.com. Their social media links are at the upper right of the page at freeprivatecities.com. All skill levels will be needed when the first of the Free Private Cities opens. It's sooner than you think. Stop arguing and build. freeprivatecities.com.
What if you want to hear the latest episode of Free Talk Live, but all you have is your phone, you forgot to download our archive, and you have no data connection? You can call our Listen line at 641-793-0191. That's a long-distance number, so you may incur charges. If not, listen as long as you want. 641-793-0191. The Free Talk Live Listen line, 641-793-0191.
After a devastating war, the alien visitors were driven back, and their willing human collaborators were left behind to face the music. When Emma Jean Anderson's ex-lover springs her from prison, Nathan Foster and his 14-year-old nephew Ben are tasked with bringing the pair to justice. An easy enough job until they discover something is inside Emma Jean, and the fate of the planet hangs in the balance. The Family Business by Mike Coopery from BaneBooks.com.
Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
You're listening to the live edition of Free Talk Live. Hour number 3 is next after the news here on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation, and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries, and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures showed that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa, as FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, but it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
From Bureaus Worldwide, this is FSN.
With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks, looking today at the corruption probe that has investigated Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, already facing intense criticism in the country over his complete failure even to recognise the threat posed by COVID-19. The probe's outcome threatens to put a crimp in the Brazilian leader's quest for re-election.
The last few weeks or last month or so, you've seen a real decline in his support. So now the vast majority of Brazilians are no longer supporting him, and a lot of the establishment business is looking for someone to back.
Shannon O'Neill is a senior fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.
He has, over the last year and a half, downplayed the severity of COVID. What he's in hot water for right now is there have been ongoing congressional investigations into the handling of COVID. We have seen just over the last week or so, someone from the health official and ministry come out with allegations that there was trying to illegally purchase particular vaccines, that there's corruption involved, and this is starting to reach throughout his administration.
In the kind of reaction that his accusers might well have anticipated, President Bolsonaro used scatological language to dismiss the investigation. He said he will answer nothing that emanates from the probe, saying the senators who headed it are simply determined to grind his government down. Presidential elections in Brazil will take place in early October of next year. With FSN Spotlight, I'm Simon Marks.
And the main news again. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. And Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. There's more from us on Twitter at Feature Story. That's Feature Story News. Nick Harper reporting.
A hot new murder craze sweeps Chicago. Things that shouldn't be said in modern society are said 1,400 times at the RNC, and a brave woman enters a restaurant without first looking it up online. This is the Onion Week in Review. The World Wildlife Fund quickly backtracked Thursday from a recently released press statement saying panda ears are, quote, absolutely delicious. Organization officials noted that while panda ears do taste amazing braised, steamed, fried, or cooked in an omelet, they should not have announced it publicly, nor should they have ever eaten any part of a cheetah, giraffe, or Bengal tiger, no matter how good they may be. According to company sources, the Netflix board of directors held a tense series of meetings earlier this morning to decide whether the fantasy comedy Michael is stream-worthy. The board reportedly sat through its mandatory 2 back-to-back screenings of the 1996 film starring John Travolta as an angel visiting Earth, all while passionately arguing over the film's story, acting, and level of enjoyment upon subsequent viewings to determine if the movie should be available through its instant viewing program.
This is the Onion News Network.
Free Talk Live.
It is Free Talk Live. Open phones for you to join us here and bring up anything that you want to talk about. 603-283-6160 is the number. That's 603-283-6160 as we kick off the third hour of the program here. With you in the studio tonight, you've got Ian.
And Aria.
And don't forget to join us on our social media platform over at social.freetalklive.com. I just tooted, as they call it, tooted out the various different stories we were talking about regarding Cuba and the restrictions in the United States there and the value of the Cuban peso. A lot of the stuff we discussed over the last 2 hours are on the Free Talk Live profile or the @FTL profile there at social.freetalklive.com. If you're sick and tired of the big tech platforms holding an axe over your head, then come on over to social.freetalklive.com and you will have way more freedom to speak here than you will there. So check that out. We're going to go to your phone calls and thoughts. And for the very first time ever, we have on our SIP line, which no one has gotten this successfully working until now. So congratulations, TJ the Spy. You're on Free Talk Live.
It's good to be with you guys. Aria, it's a pleasure to see you back on the air.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I've stayed on the air pretty consistently.
Pretty consistently. I meant to say it's good to see you back on the air with Ian, because Ian
yes. In the studio here.
It's good to be back.
I wanted to answer your question about the Capitol Lego set. So,
oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Lego set of the protester was of the Capitol building. So the prosecution is alleging that they used the Capitol building Lego set to help plan the attack.
Oh my God. Okay, so it wasn't actually having more than one building in like a whole layout of downtown DC. It was
it was a Lego set of the Capitol building, and they said that was the planning.
How detailed is this Lego set? I mean, does it have all of the floors and the building interiors, or is it just
it's just the exterior? And
so it's useless for planning.
It's going around. Believe me, it's going around the legal blogs. Everybody's making fun of the prosecutor because.
Wow,
that's good to hear. That's heartwarming.
Yeah. So how are bail conditions for you guys? Are you holding up okay? Because I know it really sucks to be out. I don't know whether I'd want to be in jail or out of jail, because both ways, it's like they have all these hooks in you that you can't get out of. It's like, can't do this, can't go anywhere without permission, can't drink, can't smoke pot, can't do this, can't do that. And
yeah,
so
I know the feeling.
Guys, how are you coping with it?
It sucks. I mean, it sucks to be owned. It sucks to have a master. And I mean, everybody has the federal master at some level. And it's just they're even more present in our lives than they've ever been. And it's no fun.
Well, I hope once you're found not guilty of all this stupid stuff that, that's what's frustrating, is that they could come after you again and again and again. So there's nothing to stop them from, filing a third set of charges or a second set of charges. And
yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, obviously, if they want to cook something up, they can. Thankfully, at least in the first raid in the case that they raided us in 2016, they didn't cook anything up. Thank goodness in that particular case. But, this time around, it's going to be a bit of a different situation. So I appreciate your optimism that you think the case will go so well in our favor.
Now, people are finally getting stuff back from that first raid, aren't they?
TJ got his stuff back.
Yes. I had to sue the FBI. I asked for it back, and they said no. So I sued them, and then they said okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Small victories.
Thank you. Don't worry. You'll get your stuff back soon, Ian. So just got to wait for the I won't say too much right now, but you'll be getting your stuff back from that March raid of 2016.
And then the investigation into the current, led to the current raid began pretty much immediately thereafter.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it started right after they messed up the first one. They're like, God curses, we can't get Ian Freeman on 18 USC section 2252, so we're going to have to go with, 18 USC section 371 conspiracy.
Oh, that plus a myriad of other charges.
Continuing a financial crimes enterprise and wire fraud and I'm surprised they didn't charge everyone with FBAR violations or something. Actually, I better not.
Well, don't give them any ideas.
Ideas, right? Yeah, that's.
With what violations?
Foreign bank account reports. It's one of those things that if you have a foreign bank account, the IRS asks that you fill out a one-page form telling them you have a foreign bank account. And the trick is it's illegal to willfully not file one. So if you ever, any point in the year, you have $10,000 or more in a foreign bank account or a sum of foreign bank accounts, you have to fill out this FBAR or foreign bank account report with the IRS, and your willful failure to file it is a felony. So, the thing is, I always tell people, shut up if the IRS ever comes to the door, because if your lawyer says, look, my client didn't know about these reporting requirements, he's willing to comply with them now, you'll get a lot easier treatment than if you say, I don't think I should have to comply with the law.
So, TJ, I heard a rumor you might be coming up to New Hampshire.
I am. I'm actually in Missouri. James is with me, but he's going to be going down to Georgia to see his folks. But I'll be up there in a few days. To
he's breaking away. He's not coming up here with you?
No, he got the COVID shot, so he has the flu right now. He had a little bit of a reaction to it, but not much.
How long are you staying in New Hampshire? Are you going to be here in Keene for Nightcap Friday night?
Yes, I will be.
Oh, fantastic.
Awesome.
So that's one of the things Aria can do that I cannot do. I actually asked if I could go to the park at night this weekend and was told no by my master.
Care to share how you asked that question?
No, I don't want to.
Via email, obviously.
Yes, via email. Yeah, everything's via email. Well, most things are via email. I mean, my probation officer could be a lot worse, I'm sure, than he is. I'm sure I'm not his most difficult client. I imagine he deals with a lot of kind of bad characters because actual like dangerous types that he has to deal with. So
yeah, but I imagine you are the type of person to make his life as difficult as possible.
Why?
Because that's what you do with bureaucrats.
Ian making life difficult for bureaucrats, I would never
That's
guess
not true.
that.
That's not true. When it comes to jailers, I don't make their lives difficult. I understand that they are tasked with this job. It's a sucky job, and I'm not there to make their job worse so they can take it out on me, basically. The only thing that I did that might be considered that was refuse to wear a mask, and I have a medical reason not to, and they just, some of them didn't like that, but all of them respected that. And otherwise, when I'm in jail, I'll do what I'm told because, first of all, you do what you're told, you get out earlier, usually, right? Like if you're actually sentenced in most places, if you're a good little boy or girl, you'll get out on good time. So like here in New Hampshire, it's a 2/3 good time rule. If you're not good, then you stay in for 3/3. So, the incentives are there. And
that's a sensible approach.
You don't want the person who feeds you to not like you. You know what I mean?
Fair point.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fun being on, Ian, and that's all I have
all right,
to say.
TJ the Spy.
I'm praying for you guys.
We'll see you here sooner rather than later. Thanks for the call and enjoy the ride. Sounded great, by the way, on that sip. Almost like he was sitting here in the studio with us, and maybe he will be when he comes up to hang out here in Keene. For those that don't know, that's TJ the Spy, former co-host here on Free Talk Live. He was actually my roommate at the time when the Free Talk Live studios were raided the first time in 2016, and that's what he was referencing there. So, interesting character, former NSA agent.
That's why we call him TJ the Spy.
Yeah, he has a lot of interesting stories to tell. So we were telling you about what's happening down in South Africa with hundreds of people already in custody. Almost 500 suspects have been arrested in 2 provinces with massive protests that have turned into looting and arson. I saw a video this afternoon of what looked like hundreds of people just streaming in and out of a shopping mall, carrying everything from chest freezers to furniture, all kinds of whatever they could get their hands on.
So the same old story. People are using, legitimate, I'm assuming it's legitimate outrage as an excuse to basically
take stuff.
Yeah, to steal.
So that's happening. And things are, buildings are being burned. People are shooting at each other. It's not clear. The video that I saw was armed men. The video camera was on the side of the armed men, and the armed men are like being sort of approaching a group of rioters they're just sort of in this like large street with grass on the side. There's not really much else going on except things being thrown at the armed men. So presumably they're the cops, but they don't appear to be in any sort of uniform or anything like that. So who knows who they actually are. And they're shooting at the rioters who are throwing things at them. So this is a very violent and dangerous conflict all over the president of South Africa, who has been put in a jail cell.
What is he accused of?
I don't know. That's a great question. High-level corruption in his 9 years in office. There's more on the way. If you want to share your thoughts, 603-283-6160. You can join us. This is Free Talk Live.
When a lunar observatory detects a radio broadcast originating from Proxima Centauri, the nations of Earth discover their first contact with an alien race may also be their last. With the Proximans facing an extinction-level disaster, Earth must choose between sending a ship on a multi-year journey or allowing nature to take its course. Saving Proxima, a hard science fiction thriller by Travis S. Taylor and Les Johnson from BaneBooks.com.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you're helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at Bitcoin.com. That's Bitcoin.com.
Do you feel like your nation, state, or community no longer holds your values? Have you dreamt of a place where people agree that liberty is important and are free to pursue their projects so long as they respect the property of others? There are many people just like you that are discovering freeprivatecities.com. Their social media links are at the upper right of the page at freeprivatecities.com. All skill levels will be needed when the first of the Free Private Cities opens. It's sooner than you think. Stop arguing and build. freeprivatecities.com.
Some of you asked, and now we've delivered. LRN.FM's live Keene, New Hampshire studio shows are now streamed in HD on Twitch. Visit our channel at twitch.lrn.fm and give it a follow. If you have Amazon Prime, you get one free subscription on Twitch. If you use it on our channel, Twitch will give LRN.FM a monthly piece of your Prime subscription cost. So please watch, follow, share, and subscribe to twitch.lrn.fm. That's twitch.lrn.fm.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, yeah, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. It's physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com. If you want to know the latest about Free Talk Live before we go on the air, all you need to decide is how you want it delivered. It's your choice. Visit news.freetalklive.com to receive our usually weekly news updates by email. Plus, we have a Twitter account at twitter.freetalklive.com, and you can follow us on the decentralized Mastodon platform at toot.freetalklive.com. So please follow us at toot.freetalklive.com and sign up for our emails at news.freetalklive.com.
My name is Jacob Hornberger. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, which Congressman Ron Paul awarded for having an outstanding freedom website. Write us at fff@fff.org, and we'll send you a free 3-month subscription to our monthly journal of libertarian essays and our booklet, Economic Liberty in the Constitution, which George Mason University economics professor Walter Williams praised in a recent column. That's fff@fff.org.
Do you appreciate what we do? Help us advertise, market, and promote for just $5 a month at amp.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live, open phones, the number 603-283-6160, or call us on SIP, our SIP address, ftl.onsip.info. It's ftl@ftl.onsip.info. You can get that on our website and get the instructions on how to set up your client. It's one of those things where you got to set up an account and then make sure that the client is set up correctly and has all the options set. So there's maybe a 10-minute investment of time here to get this thing rolling. But man, once you do, you'll sound as good as TJ did just a moment ago.
Yeah, the quality was fantastic.
Yeah, and then once you get it set up, it's like boom, boom, you're connected, and you don't even have to wait for it to ring.
Nice.
And it just opens a connection and you're on. As long as somebody else isn't on the line, which so far TJ's the only one who's called in a month that we've had it available. So,
well, he's a former IT person, isn't he?
Yeah, he knows his stuff when it comes to the internet. But if you follow the instructions step by step, it should work for you too. So go to freetalklive.com, scroll on down. When we're not on the air, there's a little window at the top of the website that has our phone number and then the word SIP next to it. If you click on SIP, it takes you right to the instructions. So that's an easy way to find it, but it's not there during our live hours for whatever reason. So let's talk about crypto. Aria, change gears here. We've done a lot of international coverage tonight with the protests in Cuba and the riots.
We also explained how cryptocurrency would help the Cubans.
Yes, it would, by cutting out the middleman, which is one of the amazing things that cryptocurrency allows people to do, is cut out the banks, cut out the Western unions, cut out the governments from the picture of money. And when you do that, and you combine the internet with, mathematics and cryptography, you get an amazing, and decentralization, you get an amazing way of transferring value from one individual to another without anyone being able to stand in the way. Now, in some cases...
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing. In some cases, though, some of these crypto tokens are reversible. So keep in mind, not all cryptocurrencies are created equal. Just because it's a cryptocurrency or a token or whatever doesn't mean that you have irreversibility. Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Dash, Monero, all these things.
Ethereum Classic.
Yeah.
But not Ethereum.
Exactly. Well, these tokens I was going to tell you about are all based on Ethereum, which all of them, or almost all of them, are reversible. So you do need to do a little bit of due diligence before you decide which one of these things to utilize.
Yes, because if it's reversible, then someone ultimately can just take your money from you.
Someone being usually the government. And we can talk about that.
Or just the institution behind the token.
That's correct, but usually they only do that at the behest of law enforcement. So the times when, for instance, stable coins, and we'll talk about what a stable coin is, it's usually dollar-backed or backed by some other thing, a crypto token, there have been requests made by law enforcement to some of the stablecoin issuers like USDC, and USDC has obliged the law enforcement of those requests and has reversed certain transactions.
I did not know that had happened.
Yeah, yeah.
All the more reason to avoid them.
Yes.
Not to mention they're pegged to the USD, so they're pegged to a dying currency.
Indeed. So Bloomberg reporting, and Yahoo Finance has the story. Regulators are worried about hidden risks to investors and even the financial system stemming from a fast-growing corner of the crypto market meant to be immune from volatility. Their focus is on so-called stablecoins, a form of cryptocurrency that has a fixed price, typically $1, and is backed by real money reserves.
But they're not... But they're still volatile because the USD is also volatile. It's constantly losing value.
Yes, but people don't see it that way. You're right, Aria. The dollar, is that volatile? Because volatile suggests it could go up or down.
Good point.
I would say it's consistent in that it goes down in value. It's predictable in that it goes down in value. So I wouldn't say volatile is really the right word for that. It is unpredictable as far as what the rate of its decline is. So whether it's 3% in a year or 20% in a year, I don't know, and they won't tell you because they don't report those numbers accurately on purpose.
Yeah, they will never give a straight answer about what inflation is actually occurring.
But I guess really the term stablecoin comes from the idea that the thing is tethered to another thing. Like the crypto token, the electronic thing, is tethered to a real life thing, whether it be the dollar or the euro or an ounce of gold.
Now, how is that different from how your digital dollars in a U.S. bank account are also tethered to real dollars, where you could just go to your bank and withdraw that money and you get USD from it versus using...
The difference is these are on cryptocurrency networks and so therefore can be transferred without the approval of banks, which makes them more useful.
Sure.
Right. So you and I both know what it's like dealing with banks when it comes to, going into banks and having them do things. In the case of a stable coin, while, yeah, in theory, they could reverse the transaction. Like you said, you'd never even heard of that happening. So it's less likely that...
I knew it was possible on Tether, but I hadn't
It's possible
heard that...
on all of them, from what I understand, with the exception of... Or all of the Ethereum-based ones, at least.
DAI.
With the exception of
DAI is also on...
It is, but that's the one that doesn't have the reversibility factor because DAI is a decentralized stablecoin. So DAI is a dollarized stablecoin that's not actually backed by dollars. It's backed by cryptocurrency deposits and valued in dollars. And how all that works, I can't explain it to you.
I can't imagine the programming and
it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's an amazing product. I think of all the stablecoins on the Ethereum system, DAI is the most interesting.
It's also on the Bitcoin Cash network.
DAI is now?
I thought it was.
I didn't
Am I
know
wrong?
that. You should verify that. I know USDC and Tether, I think, are on Bitcoin. Or Tether definitely is on Bitcoin Cash. I'm not sure about USDC. I think USDC is on Stellar and a few others. And USDT, Tether is on a bunch of them. And if
I don't know, for whatever reason, I thought DAI was on Bitcoin. I thought it started on Bitcoin Cash and then went to Ethereum.
No,
so
no,
I'm just
it was
mistaken.
always originally an Ethereum token because it's got a complex contract out there. DAI is very complicated because it has to do with people depositing other cryptocurrencies in larger amounts than what there are issued. So in order to issue or to mint new DAI into existence, there has to be at least 150% of Bitcoin or Ethereum put into the system. And I think some people collateralize like 200 or 300% because if the value of the Ethereum that you've locked into the DAI system drops too much, they'll like liquidate your holdings and then you won't be able to get the Ethereum back if you turn in the DAI. It's a very complicated system and it's interesting if you want to dig into it. That's not what we should do here on the radio. So, but as far as reversibility is concerned, I think if you're using Tether on like the Bitcoin Cash network, I don't think they can reverse that because Bitcoin Cash just has tokens. It doesn't have the contract aspect associated with it where the people that write the contract can put in reversal tools and things. But don't quote me on that. That's just what I've heard. If you want to weigh in, you can at 603-283-6160.
It's definitely a complicated subject.
Well, it's simple, at least in the idea that what we're talking about here is a simple concept in that there are cryptocurrency tokens that trade over these cryptocurrency networks that are backed by dollars. That's what this article is focusing on. And at the end of May, according to the story here at Bloomberg, the total market capitalization of the stable coins, which include the ones offered by crypto firms Tether and Centre, those are the two biggest, broke $100 billion. So there are now 100 billion crypto tokens that are valued at a US dollar that are trading actively across the planet right now. And that's a lot.
Yes, it is.
A lot of money. And lawmakers aren't happy about this because it basically means that people can transmit the US dollar, can send it to, from one to another person, and cut out the government and the banks from the picture for the most part. It's Free Talk Live.
Carl Watner, longtime proponent of a voluntary society, died last December. You may have seen his articles published on his website, voluntarist.com, in his newsletter, The Voluntarist, the Mises Institute, or elsewhere over the last 40 years. His newest book, I Must Speak Out, Volume 2, The Best of the Voluntarist, is now available via Liberty Under Attack Publications. This 430-page second volume spans the years of 2000 through 2020 and includes articles by Carl Watner, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Carl Hess, Benjamin Tucker, George H. Smith, Lysander Spooner, Pete Eyre, Joyce Brand, and many others. I Must Speak Out is for the newly initiated, the veteran voluntarist, or anywhere in between. Buy the book now at libertyunderattack.com/voluntarist. For more great content on building a voluntary society and for Carl's extensive archives, check out voluntarist.com.
From Feature Story News in Washington, I'm Nick Harper. Thousands of protesters have taken part in rare demonstrations in Cuba against the country's communist government. Security forces have detained and beaten some of the demonstrators in what are the largest protests for decades. The White House says it stands with the Cuban people, as FSN's Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Cubans, angry at the collapse of the economy and the rising number of coronavirus infections, took to the streets shouting, "Down with the dictatorship." Thousands of pro-government supporters responded after the president went on television urging them to fight the protesters. US President Joe Biden called on the government to, quote, hear its people and serve their needs rather than their own. Its largely state-controlled economy shrank by 11% last year, its worst decline in almost 3 decades.
The top American commander in Afghanistan is stepping down from his post as the US military withdrawal continues. It comes as the Taliban has recorded a number of military advancements in recent days. FSN's US correspondent William Denslow reports.
After nearly 3 years in the role, General Austin Scott Miller is leaving his position of overseeing the US war in Afghanistan. His departure is seen as a significant step in the Biden administration's plan of completing a military withdrawal by the end of August. The war was launched in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Pentagon estimates around 2,400 US troops have been killed in Afghanistan, and more than 50,000 opposition fighters have died, according to some estimates. Marine General Kenneth Frank McKenzie will oversee the rest of the US operation and warns a resurgent Taliban are seeking a military victory over the Afghan government.
Haitian authorities have arrested a US-based doctor they allege was the mastermind behind the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Haiti's police chief says Florida-based Dr. Christian Emmanuel Sanon flew to the country last month, recruited mercenaries, and planned to seize power after the assassination. New United Nations figures showed that as the pandemic raged across the world in 2020, world hunger dramatically increased. In the first global assessment of the hunger crisis in the pandemic era, the UN reports that around 1/10 of the world's population didn't have enough food to eat, especially in Asia and Africa, as FSN's UN correspondent Li Ling Tan reports.
Up to 811 million people were estimated to go hungry in 2020 as the pandemic disrupted food systems and access to populations already facing hunger and malnutrition. Children paid the highest price. More than half of them live in Asia, but it was Africa that saw the sharpest spike, with 21% of the population underfed and accounting for 1/3 of the world's undernourished.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com.
It's Free Talk Live. Phones are open if you want to join us here. 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. We're talking about the stablecoin quote-unquote problem, according to lawmakers and officials from the Federal Reserve. Yes, they're not happy at all about the fact that somebody has created a more useful version of the U.S. dollar.
They're not happy that someone beat them to creating a dollar cryptocurrency.
Well, they're not going to be creating a dollar cryptocurrency.
They're not?
No. They're looking at creating a central bank digital currency, which is not a cryptocurrency.
Okay, fair point.
And to be fair, the crypto tokens in this case aren't cryptocurrencies either. They're tokens that operate on the back of cryptocurrency networks and require some amount of cryptocurrency usually to send those tokens out. So they're.
I think Nubits was an actual independent, non-tokenized dollar-pegged currency, but it was very weak and it didn't stay pegged to the dollar
so it failed
for a long time. In 2017, yeah, it crashed to like 20-something cents.
DAI, on the other hand, has stayed pegged. There was some dangerous situations that people were worried about, but they made it through it, and DAI has sort of proven its mettle from this point, or in the past. And so let's talk about the concerns they have. But first, we're going to go to your calls and thoughts. We have James on the line in Arizona to brighten our day. James, you're on Free Talk Live.
Yes, Drag Queen James.
Drag Queen James.
Are you coming out? James, I'm so happy for you.
It's so funny. Hey, Drag Queen James, I called to talk to you about a serious fair warning. If you think you're going to get away with shitting on my own...
Okay, you know better than saying the S word on the radio, dude. I expect better out of you, James, and shame on you for that.
Yeah,
disappointing.
I mean, if you want to call and insult me, okay, fine, but keep it FCC friendly, dude.
After all this time of you being banned from the show and then being unbanned, of course he's calling back, but he's not getting back on. And the nice thing is now we have caller ID here, so I don't actually have to answer the phone to know that it's James calling in. So
that is a neat feature.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this new phone system that we have in here. Not only can we take SIP calls that sound awesome, but we can actually see who's calling before we pick up the phone.
What's annoying is that, he sent me an email called Fair Warning, right before he came on to give me the fair warning.
Right.
But
He didn't warn us that he was going to say the S word on the radio, though.
No, that would have been a nice warning.
Yeah, normally he's at least well behaved enough to stay radio friendly, and so maybe he's just had too much to drink tonight. Either way, James, you have one call per night. You can call back another time. So back to the story here at Bloomberg about cryptocurrencies, specifically the stablecoins, the ones backed by the dollar. Recently, lawmakers and officials from the Federal Reserve and the government administration have expressed alarm, both in public and private, that some consumers won't actually be protected should one of the firms not have the backing they purport to have. What they mean there is
one of these firms committed fraud.
Well, there hasn't been any evidence of that yet, but it could be the case.
No, I mean, if one of these. Yeah.
They also say the growing size of stablecoins has created a situation where huge amounts of U.S. dollar equivalent coins are being exchanged without touching the U.S. banking system, potentially blinding regulators to illicit finance.
Look, almost every government agency has already come out and said that the vast majority of cryptocurrency transactions are totally legal, not shady, not illicit.
Right. If you want to do illicit finance, get some cash.
Yeah,
because
you can't do cocaine with a dollar tether.
No, and there's no you don't want to pay for cocaine with a dollar tether either because it's traceable.
And reversible.
Yes, all of these stable coins are traceable. Whether they're all reversible is another question, but all of them are public. There's no private stable coin that I'm aware of, which leads me to ask the question, hey, Monero, why didn't you do this? Like, why isn't there a Monero dollar, like a stable coin dollar that operates on the dark net, or that operates...
I wouldn't want one.
I know you wouldn't, but a lot of people probably would. Look at the popularity of these things right now.
I don't understand the popularity of them, though.
Okay, let me help you with this because I was in the same situation until a couple of years ago. So when you take a cryptocurrency like a Bitcoin and you turn it into dollars. So let's say you're on Coinbase and you say, I want to take my Bitcoin, I've made all this money on it, right? And I want to turn it into dollars and pay off my mortgage or whatever. And you go and you sell the Bitcoin. Well, as I understand it, the government considers that a taxable event because now you have earned quote unquote capital gains on that Bitcoin.
Okay.
However,
assuming it was higher when you sold it than it was when you bought it.
Correct. And I don't agree that people should have to track that crap. I think it's ridiculous, the idea that you should somehow know when you bought all of the Bitcoins that you bought or earned, because a lot of us earned cryptocurrency instead of buying them. So what's that mean? So there's a lot of really ridiculous questions regarding what the government rules are on that, but that's my understanding of it. But what is it when you take a cryptocurrency and exchange it for a cryptocurrency token? Is that a taxable event?
I see.
So, and also, it opens up for traders way more options. So every exchange on the planet, almost all of them, have stablecoin and crypto, what they call trading pairs. So if you are trading Bitcoin for, other things, you want to buy Bitcoin or sell Bitcoin for Dash or Bitcoin Cash or, these various different trades, you can also put them into the stablecoins on exchanges. So let's say you see Bitcoin's price is tumbling. Bitcoin's going down. You think it's going to continue going down, and you had purchased some Bitcoin at some point. So let's look at this, the 60,000 hit that it went up to earlier this year. You bought Bitcoin or earned it at $30,000, and it went up to $60,000, and you're like, all right. And then you notice it's starting to fall, and now it's 50,000. Now it's 49,000, and you're like, okay, I think I should trade my Bitcoin for stablecoins on an exchange. Lock in the price in dollars at that point. So let's say you do it at 50. Well, now you got 50,000 Tether on the exchange, and the price of Bitcoin continues to fall. So the dollars in that case are actually more worth having because you expect the Bitcoin's going to come back. The Bitcoin, let's say, falls down to 30,000. You then take your 50,000, buy back the Bitcoin that you sold already at the lower price. Now you have the same amount of Bitcoin that you had before, and the Tether with which you could then go and buy other things with at that point. So does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. So there's a trading usage that's very, very useful of these things, and you're not trading into the actual dollar. You're not using the real dollar. You're not receiving dollars in a bank account when you're doing that. It's just a dollar token on the exchange that you use as though it's a dollar. So it allows traders to do a lot more and may or may not have some sort of tax benefit. I'm not giving tax advice. I don't understand the government's tax system. I have no idea.
The government doesn't understand the government's tax system. It's something like 80,000 pages, isn't it?
True. And there's actually studies that have been done where people call the IRS and ask the 10 most basic, most asked questions to the IRS, and they don't have the right answers a lot of the time.
I'm not surprised. I remember seeing a study done several years ago. It was, I think, 30 different accountants doing someone's taxes for them. And all 30 different accountants came up with different answers on what they were supposed to pay. I mean, it's a mess. It's 80,000 pages. No human being can parse that amount of information.
So here's another potential benefit for you of these stable coins. As we discussed earlier, dollars in other countries are useful, right? Because if the governments there are hyperinflating their currencies, as much as we don't like the dollar, it's still not as hyperinflated as the rest. So
I would rather people use dollars than bolivars.
Yeah, exactly. So if they can get themselves these stable coins, it's a way for them to actually put value into, to essentially open up a dollar-based account, which is prohibited in their country. You can't go into the bank in Cuba and open a dollar-based account. You can't go into the bank in China and open a dollar-based account, but you can have stable coins in a Edge wallet that the government doesn't know about. So it's a way for people in other countries to aggregate value in a way that their governments can't even track and keep it in the dollar. Now, again, I agree with you. They should probably put it into cryptocurrencies instead of that, but
baby steps.
It's useful, is what I'm saying. 603-283-6160. In my opinion of it, 3 or 4 years ago used to be, why the hell would you want to crypto dollar? That's why. So 603-283-6160, and the government sure doesn't like it. Like they said here, they're worried. Oh, we need to protect the consumer from these stable coins. It's Free Talk Live.
If you're looking for work, the person you are applying to is probably so swamped with applicants that he or she is tough to reach. So call early in the day, before 8 a.m., before the palace guards arrive. You'll need your prospect's direct number, and here's a sneaky way to get it. Suppose the company's main number is 555-5000. You should call 555-5012. When someone says, "Good morning, Pam Johnson," you should innocently say, "Oops, somebody here must have written this down wrong. I was calling for Tom Frederick. What's his direct number?" If the very next thing you hear isn't Pam giving you Tom's number, it may be, "Good morning, Tom Frederick." For more tips for job seekers and getting better results in all your day-to-day communication, hit survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
Is oral health important to you? If you don't like your own teeth, fresh breath, or kissing people, then by all means stop listening. Several years ago, I met Jessica Armand, founder and CEO of My Magic Mud, and I became passionate about the product that she created and never want to live without it. It's clinically proven to whiten teeth, but I find it does much more. They want you to love My Magic Mud as much as I do, so they're giving you a money-back guarantee plus 20% off. Go to mymagicmud.com and use coupon code FTL20 at checkout. mymagicmud.com, FTL20.
The LRN.FM social media channels have been revamped. We've eliminated Facebook and focused on other platforms like Twitter and Mastodon, the decentralized alternative to Twitter. On our accounts, you'll find posts from multiple LRN.FM show hosts together in one place. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.lrn.fm, or better yet, move to the decentralized Mastodon social media platform at toot.lrn.fm, toot.lrn.fm. I think you'll like it.
Free Talk Live.
I wanted to ask your listeners about the religion and the people who practice Wicca. What do they think their agenda is? Is it to take over the world? Or?
Oh, no. No, I don't think so.
I mean, because they're somewhat of bullies.
They're bullies? What do you mean?
They bully with the religion themselves. A lot of people are afraid of them.
Can you give me an example?
The Tea Party.
The Tea Party has to do with Wicca?
Well, it's mostly because they're so secretive.
So
the Wiccans.
The Wiccans are secretive, and they have a lot of numbers, and they've infiltrated the Tea Party?
will they use them? Like, for instance, the breakdown of Obamacare, that could very well have been the Wiccans using their power to break down the computers.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
There are lots of ways to listen to Free Talk Live. Our podcast has been around since podcasts began, and now the FTL feed is loaded with content besides our full show archives. Did you know that we make it easy for you to customize your podcast subscriptions? We have different feeds, one that includes only our full shows, one with just the Daily Digest, and our main feed that includes everything. You decide what you listen to. It's quick and easy to customize your feeds at feeds.freetalklive.com. That's feeds.freetalklive.com.
There are basically two types of advertising, direct response and branding. Radio's great for direct response with its low cost to listener ratio, but audio can't be beat for branding, which is a longer-term endeavor. You want to be the first thing that someone thinks of when they think about your product or service. If you have a local business that you want kept top of mind in your community, call the station. If you need national reach, Free Talk Live's got around 200 radio stations, millions of monthly listening sessions, can suit all budgets, and if we don't think we're right for you, we'll tell you. Email me, mark@freetalklive.com.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com.
This is Free Talk Live. Moments remain here, enough time for you if you want to jump on the lines with us. With you in the studio tonight, it's Ian.
And Aria.
The number is 603-283-6160. That's 603-283-6160. We're talking about the phenomenon of the stable coin. And we just went through kind of a quick exercise where I explained why, in some circumstances, stable coins are useful. In the case of trading online without actually turning crypto into real dollars, they're useful. They're useful for people in other countries who want to get their hands on the dollar, but they can't open accounts in the dollar in their countries, and it allows them to put some wealth away in a way that the governments can't track, at least that they wouldn't know about. They can track. So, like, stable coins are completely trackable. If somebody knows you have stable coins, they know your wallet address, they can watch, they can see whenever you spend them. But regardless, according to Bloomberg, the people in the U.S. banking system, the Federal Reserve specifically, and the government gangsters in D.C., calling themselves lawmakers, are very concerned. According to Lev Menand, an academic fellow at Columbia Law School, in his testimony to a Senate banking subcommittee recently, he said, quote, "They're dangerous to both their users and, as they grow, to the broader financial system." Now, that's a ringing endorsement to me of
it's hard to hear anything else.
The stablecoin situation. Administration officials have expressed concern to representatives of stablecoin issuers in recent weeks that consumers don't understand that money held in a stablecoin isn't protected by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
I suspect they do understand that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, how many people even know what the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is? I mean, they may have seen the little logo at their bank counter, but what percentage of bank customers even know what the FDIC is?
That's a really good point. And for those who don't know, it is a guarantee. I mean, to prevent bank runs, the federal government will cover that amount of money in the event that the bank doesn't have your money. So if you have I think it's $250,000 now. So if you have $275,000 and you try to withdraw it and the bank doesn't have it,
I think you've misidentified what it is. So I wouldn't say it's to prevent bank runs. It's to prevent bank failures. So if the bank fails in some way, if it closes,
yes, that's a fair way of putting it.
Yeah, then the federal government will supposedly make you whole, but I suspect that they're not obligated to.
I thought it was mostly a matter of if the bank didn't have your money for whatever reason, like.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly.
Like in the event of a bank run.
In the event of a bank run, you're going to see other things being imposed, like they do in other countries, right? Where they freeze any access to accounts, or they limit at the country level the amount of money you can withdraw from an ATM, which is what we've seen happening in Greece, for instance, in the recent past.
Well, I don't mean nationally, but like at a local bank, at like Sycamore Bank in Mississippi, if they were to experience a bank run, for whatever economic reason that they went through one, I thought the point of the FDIC was to guarantee people would receive a certain amount of their money back.
I don't think it's, I think if you looked at, I'm just speculating here, but I think if you looked at the details, I suspect it's not guaranteed.
Making it useless.
I suspect that if it was a real bank run situation, that the feds would just renege on the offer, and you'd have no way to sue them. You'd have no recourse whatsoever on that. The general understanding, my understanding of the FDIC is if a bank fails, meaning that if it, for whatever reason, is going out of business and you had money and they spent it on something or whatever, and you can say, hey, I had this money in this account, the FDIC is supposed to make that good.
Okay.
A bank run, is where they close the bank because they can't, fulfill all the requests for withdrawals.
And for people who are wanting their money back.
Yeah, and maybe they would come into that situation, but usually, if a bank run's going to happen, it's happening on a wider scale, right? Like it's an economic disaster situation, and it's not just one bank that's having a run. So, so they're worried that the stablecoin's not protected by the FDIC. Oh, you know what else is true? There's a bunch of websites out there that will actually pay you like 10% interest on stablecoins. So you want to know why the banks are upset about this? Because these websites out there, like, let's see. One of them's Nexo, Celsius. I think there's CoinLoan.
I remember we talked about these in the past. It's basically you loan them your Tether or your dollar Tether, whatever cryptocurrency it is. I say Tether, but that is a specific.
That's one crypto token, yeah.
And they will, loan it out to other people or sell it to other people or whatever. They will make a profit of it, and they will actually give you 10% interest on your loan.
APY, 10%. Good luck finding a bank that'll give you 1.
Yeah, I've only ever seen like 0.25, I think, at the most.
It's a joke. Bank interest rates are laughably low, and these other companies, they just flipped they flipped the scam on its head, and they said, you know what? We don't have the overhead these banks have. We don't have the locations. We don't have the staffing, issues. We don't have to deal with the customers like that. We don't have the costs that these banks have. We don't have the compliance requirements. We're going to give our customers decent rates. Now, are they insured? That's another question. You need to do your due diligence and find out if these companies have any kind of insurance coverage whatsoever. I mean, because you are giving your money over to their custody. So it is a legitimate concern asking, are they insured?
But the government's job isn't to protect people from not doing their own research.
Correct. So they could potentially lose money on a stablecoin, according to a person familiar with the matter who requested anonymity to describe confidential discussions. The person said officials are worried that criminals could use stablecoins to transfer money without having to touch a bank, meaning
they can do that already with cash.
They could, but you can't easily send cash, from the U.S. to Cuba, for instance.
True.
Meaning that they could avoid protections to catch money launderers and other illicit activity. Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren compared stablecoins to wildcat notes issued by poorly capitalized banks in the 19th century that later stuck many of their holders with large losses. Speaking at a Senate Banking Subcommittee hearing last week, Warren said that, this was a few weeks ago, by the way, Warren said that if the Federal Reserve were to issue its own digital currency, consumers could get the benefits of a stablecoin without that kind of risk.
But they're not getting the benefits. The benefits, as you've outlined, are that it bypasses all of these control mechanisms that allow people to actually transact freely.
Right. She's lying. She either doesn't understand the situation, or she's lying.
Very likely. She's a politician, which means she's stupid.
A mixture of both is also a possibility as well. As you say here, Aria, the stablecoin has all kinds of benefits that exist because it's not part of the banking system, because it is outside, for the most part, of the banking system. Now, to be fair, most of the companies that are issuing stablecoins are happy to obey the regulators. They want to be seen as good little, regulatory citizens, and they will do what they're told by lawmakers for the most part. DAI may be the exception to that rule because it is decentralized, and therefore they can't undo transactions, as I understand it. But what she really means is, if the Federal Reserve issues its own digital currency, and they're investigating that possibility,
I think it's inevitable.
The federal government would get the benefits, not you, not the consumer. The federal government, the Federal Reserve, would then have control over your wallet. The Federal Reserve would then get to decide whether or not you get to send your dollar coin to whoever it is you want to send it to. And you better believe they're not going to let you send it to Cuba.
No. And then we're right back into the system where you try to send someone money for a completely legitimate reason.
And
but
it gets
the bank
flagged.
or whatever, it gets flagged, or the bank asks you to play 20 questions with them, and you're just trying you're just trying to pay your grandmother's life insurance bill or medical bills or whatever. It's a broken system.
The U.S. and other nations are already considering launching their own digital currencies. These coins, known as central bank digital currencies, would be direct competitors to stable coins. Later this year, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston will publish research and open source code showing technology that could underpin a digital dollar. So they are working on this. It's not official in any sense of the form at this point.
Open source is promising. That's a surprising feature.
It's just a misdirection. They're only open sourcing the sort of the pitch, basically. They're like, hey, look, here's what we can do. You can better believe the end result is not going to be open source. Last month, in a statement on the Fed's progress...
However, Bitcoin is open source.
It sure is. The Fed chairman said that stablecoins could pose risks to the financial system. He says, as stablecoins' use increases, so must our attention to the appropriate regulatory and oversight framework. Widening use of stablecoins could fragment the financial system, according to Fed Governor Lael Brainerd. That sounds like great news.
Dude, they have no idea how far behind they are.
Oh, I love it.
They're just now getting to Tether.
Yeah. And Tether's got like 60 billion in assessed value, market cap. Out of time for tonight. We'll post this article, and you can see all the rest of the stuff we've talked about on our social media site, which you should join over at social.freetalklive.com. It's free to do that, and you can express yourself there. Social.freetalklive.com. See you tomorrow.
Brute force, intransigent defiance, adamantine will. These are the hallmarks of the AI tank. These gigantic machines have the firepower of an army, but they also have their own sense of honor and duty. When the world breakers arrive, battle will be joined, planets will shake, and war and peace will never be the same again. World Breakers. Stories from David Weber, Larry Correia, and more. Available August 3rd from BaneBooks.com.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin.